I am in
happened
the
to
guest box on
Justin?
TikTok.
Oh yeah, we're still friends with Justin. Justin's coming back at the end of the summer. He has like family obligations to take care of.
Fatherhood.
Mute up.
I muted. I
What
am in the
happened to
guest box on
Justin?
TikTok.
Oh yeah, we're still friends with
Oh
Justin.
no,
Justin's coming
gosh.
back
Oh
at
geez.
the end of the
What the
summer.
fuck?
What? What happened?
He has like overstimulation. Okay, sorry. No, it's just that the stream was playing.
Oh,
Yeah.
my bad.
No, it's okay, it's okay. In fact, it's not your bad. It was my bad. It was up on my computer.
Yeah, so Usain Bolt still has the world record for the fastest ever 100-meter dash.
Okay,
And that was in 2009.
but that claim presupposes that you have hands. What's your epistemic justification for you having hands or Usain Bolt existing or any of that?
Look, hands.
But how do you know? How do you know that it's not just an illusion?
Well, because I have hands.
Giga Chad. Hey, is it working on YouTube? Is the audio
Let me double check.
quality like completely messed up? Is there like a horrible, awful, terrible, no good echo? I sure hope not. That would be sad and unfortunate.
Okay, so it seems okay. You have a little bit, you sound like you're in a bathroom, but not in a bad way. You just sound like booming and powerful. So,
Okay. I'll accept that.
yeah, I think it's okay.
Yeah, if anything, it's like a rhetorical. It's like a rhetorical.
Yeah, it's a W,
benefit.
right?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Why isn't Justin here? Justin isn't here because he has like family obligations. He's taking
He's off
care
being
of
a
his
good
son.
father.
Yeah. Allow me to.
What a loser being a good dad.
That's what I'm saying. Gosh, I wanted to
Imagine
talk to you
taking
about
care
like
of the next
something,
generation.
something physics related, but now I have no idea what. SMH, dude. Physics is hard.
Physics is hard, right? But that's the fun part. Actually, that's not the fun part. The fun part is having the ideas. The hard part is making the ideas work.
You know, I wanna read up on physics. I want to get into it. There's
Based?
I feel like the next stage of my like worldview development is probably getting like pretty clear on like things that involve metaphysics. I don't know. I just need to get like a clear metaphysics, and I feel like you know you need physics for that. Your metaphysics needs to be in line with physics, or else it's gibberish.
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Anybody who, I mean, like, William Lane Craig, and I've complained about this so many times. William Lane Craig's like, yeah, I think that I think that a theory of time is true. And in fact, I actually think that there is a preferred now. And then you bring up relativity, and he's like, well, I think that's not right.
Nice, good one,
Like,
William.
so what are you supposed to say to that? Like, this is experimentally verifiable, right?
Bullet biting Bill W.
So true. Is that a salad?
It's an acai bowl.
What are you in Berkeley?
Whatever.
Like,
I think gosh, I can't even remember what it was. It related to like some like okay, so this is like an unrelated thing. Maybe you'll
Oh,
have
there's
a
an
good take
echo.
on this.
oh no, there's an echo.
For you?
I guess somebody's saying blitz echo on TikTok.
Why? How?
Testing. I don't hear an echo. Oh, I hear it. Where is it coming from? Uh, uh,
Where is that? I have no idea. This website
all right, did it
is
fix?
like genuinely so evil. I have no idea why it does this. I have no idea where this comes from. I have no idea.
Are
any
we
of
good now?
this. Yeah. I don't
Well,
know.
okay, you guys were hearing an echo because it was playing through my phone.
Oh, wait,
But
was
are
it?
we good now? Yeah, I was playing it through my phone so that I could hear if I was echoing.
Based. Wait, say it more. Say more words.
I'm saying more words now.
Okay,
Are the
based.
words
Excellent,
audible?
awesome,
Okay,
incredible,
great.
immaculate.
Cool. It only takes 20 minutes to get audio set up. No
Yeah.
worries.
Hey, if you're watching this, if you want to call in, it's in our background. Join as a guest, tinyurl.com/you-a-guest. You got to be 18 or older for terms of service reasons. We would prefer it if you weren't like a gibberator, but that's like a matter of personal preference.
You also should be 18 or older just so that, like, you're capable of having fully developed thoughts.
Yeah, I agree with that. Retweet. Oh, sure. I was going to ask you, do you have any, this is more of like a metaphysics question, but maybe you'll have like intuitions on it. Because B theory explicitly rejects like the Aristotelian notion of change, where Aristotle says that change is the actualization of a potential. But if you believe in like some eternalism, then kind of what you're going to end up being committed to is that change is not the actualization of a potential because all moments are actual. Do you have any idea what you might say that change is?
I mean, I could be cheeky and say it's an illusion. No, but you could just say that there are different states, or that on different slices of time there are different states, and change describes those differences.
Okay. Oh, this is what I wanted to talk to you about. So it's you're familiar with like the argument from motion, right?
Yeah, it feels very pre-Newton.
Oh, definitely. I agree with that for sure. But there's like there's like a really good critique of it, which is that it's invalid. It's kind of like hard to explain, but the premises given and all the reconstructions of it are perfectly 100% compatible with multiple unmoved movers. Like there's just like multiple unactualized actualizers. So like
That's a fair point.
there's no step in the argument that rules out like it says like every chain like comes back to like some like unmoved mover who's not moved in like the given way that the chain is moved. So, for example, the noodles are heated by the water, which is heated by the pot, which is heated by the stove, which is heated by the fire. There's like this like chain of like movers, and it comes back to what they want to say is that it comes back to like an unmoved mover who's specifically unmoved in like the specific way that is involved in the chain. But I think what I would be wondering, maybe you'd have like a good perspective on this. Like a good counter argument to this is to say that this actually doesn't lead to an uncaused causer. This could lead to like many uncaused causers.
Yeah, that seems
Many
right. I mean,
unactualized actualizers.
you could
So
just have two different parts of the universe that each have their own distinct unmoved mover.
well, that's what I'm wondering. Like, do you think that maybe you would help? Maybe you could help me like formulate the critique where I don't know, kind of how I'm conceptualizing it is like imagine that there's like a god who's actualizing each fundamental force of physics, and there's like a god who's like actualizing space-time. Then
Yeah.
we would have like five gods, and that would account for the universe. Do you think that
Alternatively,
yeah.
that would work. You could also say that I mean, because like our observable universe is causally disconnected from other equally large spheres displaced a certain distance in some particular direction, you could just say that each one has its own god because they're causally disconnected. They can't talk to each other.
Yeah, each atom has its own god. Each
You could even, I mean, well, no, that doesn't quite work, right? Because
sure.
the motion of the atoms is described not just by because there's other atoms influencing it. But you could just talk about causally disconnected universes that each have their own god. Like they can't talk to each other, so there's no kind of worry of like cross contamination.
That's a good one.
The only downside is of what you brought up is that like electromagnetism and the weak nuclear force are kind of the same thing if you zoom in enough. It's kind of speculated that the strong nuclear force joins in, but you could absolutely say like with current known physics, you could just say, yeah, there's one god that like actualizes space-time, and then one god that actualizes quantum field theory. And that's actually this explains why we cannot quantize gravity or something. More explanatory power than a singular God, which would expect to have a single unifying theory.
There are two unactualized actualizers. They just disagree with each other.
Yep. I mean, it seems like it's I mean, it's a terrible argument, but it's a really cheeky argument, and they won't have a response to it because
Well,
look, you have
yeah. What it
look.
is
Do
an
they have proof that
undercutting
you can
defeater.
quantize gravity?
Yeah, like you don't need to. You're like from the perspective of the atheist who's arguing this, or the just like the critic of the argument. You are not on the hook for saying like my worldview is the counterexample. You just need to say that like, listen, big dog. This doesn't deduce like one unactualized actualizer. Like it just doesn't do that.
Yeah. No, so strictly speaking, that's true. However, it's extra funny if you can say, and actually two unactualized actualizers is more consistent with modern physics.
So there's a really funny critique as well, because something that some like Thomists will say in response to that is that, well, it's like more parsimonious, and there's like plenty of critiques of that. Like one, it's no longer a deductive argument. What it is like
Right.
a rule that's like an argument that's arrived at via like a rule of thumb. Like you just like Occam's razor your way there, which is like, that's chill. Occam's razor is fine. Here's the problem of evil, which is like better evidence. Because you just drag it to like an evidential debate at that point, or like a defeasible abductive style thing at that point. But the other critique, so one argument that people like Ed Fieser makes is that if they're unactualized, then they would just be indistinguishable from each other. So there can't be more than one because they would just be indistinguishable. But that's really funny because of the Trinity. Because every member of the Trinity needs to be an unactualized actualizer that's like in some way distinct from all the other members of the Trinity. So you can't go that route.
Also, it's not clear to me why an unactualized actualizer has to, or why they can't be distinguishable from each other. Like, if they actualize different things, why couldn't?
Mm-hmm.
Like, that's just not clear.
I agree with that, yeah. Hey, if you're watching this on TikTok, some other platform, make sure you're dropping that like, dropping that subscribe. We currently have nobody, not one single person, waiting to
that's
debate
true.
us.
Yeah, so go to the tiny URL, go to tinyurl.com/uaguest. Go there, and then you can come up and talk to us. We promise we won't bite.
Yeah, unless you do.
Are we kink shaming? Is that what's happening?
No, of course not. We're saying that we'll bite if they do.
Ah, so that's like encouraging.
Yeah.
Got it.
I love a good faith dialogue. I love a bad faith dialogue too.
What I hate the most is a confusing faith dialogue.
Me too. I hate like a meandering dialogue. I love a linear dialogue. It can be aggressive. It can be not aggressive. You can set the tone. But what I can't stand is someone meandering around the point, not engaging with criticisms. Gosh, good golly.
Your URL is tiny? What? What do you mean it's tiny?
Because
it's like
because
the same.
it's tiny URL. It's a pun.
Oh. See, I just don't pick up on that. Oh, I didn't send out an announcement on my Discord. Rip. One sec.
There's I don't know, while I'm like yapping about a variety of arguments that I'm looking into right now, there's this one argument that goes against the teleological argument that I think is interesting. So you'd expect if the universe was created by a god, if it was created like intentionally, you would expect it to have like design and to have like intentionality behind it. You would expect it to be in a real way. You'd expect it to be like an art piece. You would expect to see like symbolism and these like meaningful patterns and like all this excuse me, all this other stuff. Like you'd expect like there's meaning to like the stars that you can see, and there's like meaning to all of this, and there's like intentionality and purpose, man. It's all there. But evidence against that is that the scientific framework has moved away from that. Like that's how people used to approach the stars, used to approach the cosmos, used to approach everything, and it became untenable. You know, we moved away from it. We stopped thinking about things in terms of like the meaning of the number of stars. Like we've moved away from astrology, scientifically speaking, which just makes things like the teleological argument less likely.
What, are you assuming the mind of God? What if he's an artist that just is bad at symbolism? Checkmate, atheist.
I don't know. You'd expect like something, right? You'd expect like some mention in the Bible, perhaps, about all the lovely symbolism in our cosmos.
Yeah, well, okay. Thinking about that critique. So I think generally the response from an intelligent person anyway would be something like they were just looking in the wrong place for beauty and for symbolism. Actually, you can find it in, these fundamental equations, which are elegant and simple, yet complicated and, et cetera, right? And that's a response. I guess it doesn't get you to symbolism, but it does get you to like, aesthetic stuff.
Sure. Yeah. Although I think, and you definitely know better than I do, but a lot of these like really pretty fractals or whatnot are made with like pretty simple equations. In fact, it's like pretty easy to create things like this. It's not hard to find equations that lead to like fractals, or that, you just have like a dynamical system that does stuff like that.
Oh, I meant like laws of physics.
Oh,
like Maxwell's
sure.
equations are really nice.
Oh.
They're like maximally nice, actually.
Oh, sure. Wait, which equations?
Maxwell's equations?
Oh, yeah. It's been a
The
while.
ones
I feel like
in
those
the
ones are
E&M
easy
that you
ones.
almost failed. Well, the point is that they are really easy to write down, but they describe a lot, and there's a lot of interesting stuff that comes about as the result. So you might say, well, you would have expected some very elegant, beautiful equations that describe a huge host of things if there was a designer. But then you just have to show them the standard model of particle physics, and that goes out the window.
Yeah, exactly right. Like you would, look at the simplicity of this equation. That's nice. Look at the complexity of this one. Like,
Yeah.
it's expected. It would be radically unexpected that every single equation is like mad complicated. Like that's just unexpected. But
Yeah, and in fact, the argument from simplicity, or the argument of simplicity, you can actually use that to justify some sort of like minimizing principle for like a mathematical multiverse. That we find ourselves in the universe with the simplest laws of physics because that is the principle by which, the multiverse optimizes or something like this.
sure, yeah, I think that makes sense.
And for what it's worth, I think that the mathematical multiverse is like hokum, but some smart people take it seriously. So
Yeah. I don't know. I want to look into, gosh, I just want to read more. I wish I had the time to just read all day. That's what I need. I just need like time to sit and read all day. So I can just read all the things that I want to, because I don't know, like I want to get an understanding of things like quantum mechanics and general relativity to help inform my metaphysics, because I know a lot of smart people who take wave function monism very seriously. And I don't know, I think it's like a good explanation. It makes sense. It answers the question. Like this becomes your fundamental object. It explains, or maybe potentially, possibly, depending on the interpretation, it explains fine tuning. Maybe, possibly, potentially,
yep.
it explains, I don't know, like the existence of the universe. And it kind of kicks the can down the road of like, well, why does the wave function exist? But at that point, you're just on equal footing right? Cosmological considerations don't favor the theist over you because you have the wave function that you appeal to, and all the things just stem from the wave function. And then they have God, and all the things stem from God.
Yeah, it is. It's a nice view. The one thing that always trips me up, the one thing that I don't like, and I used to think that this wasn't a problem, but it's now a problem. The many worlds interpretation, which is where wave function modism lives, it has trouble deriving the Born rule. So it's kind of just an additional assumption, which is kind of dissatisfying. And you'll have people like David Deutsch, and you'll have people like Sean Carroll who, sorry, is it David Deutsch? Yeah, I think David Deutsch and Sean Carroll will be like, actually, we do have solutions to that. But I've heard counter arguments that are fairly compelling that I don't remember offhand, which is really frustrating. But yeah, I've heard it's not clear that you can actually reproduce the Born rule just with like this. Just the idea is that you can do it with like game theory or decision theory. The Born rule, by the way, being like the how you get probabilities out from wave function stuff. In the standard quantum mechanics Copenhagen interpretation, you just assume that that's just a true feature of the world. And one of the nice things about the many worlds interpretation is that you're not supposed to have to assume anything besides the Schrodinger equation. But, and you know, Sean Carroll and David Deutsch will say things like, "Oh, well, you can derive the Born rule from like decision theory, from like rational decision making, kind of game theory type stuff." But it's, and that was compelling for a time, but now I'm less compelled by it. So,
Okay.
anyway, we have a guest.
Yeah.
Oh,
We
he
don't have a
left.
guest. Fuck. Dr. Blitz, you like Thanos snapped him out of existence.
You know, I was on the r/Thanos did nothing wrong for so long.
This guy. Hey, Chris,
All right,
how's
he's
it
back.
going? We cannot hear
Oh,
you.
we can't hear you.
Something about your audio setting is not correct. You didn't select a microphone, it seems.
Hey, Larry Beck sent $5, which is delightfully pleasant and generous. Thanks.
Yeah, we appreciate the heck out of that, Larry Beck. We can't hear you still. You have to maybe like refresh the page and then select your microphone. I can't tell if he's frozen or if he's like just stunned.
What's that David Attenborough quote? Where he whistle talks or whistle whispers about something like too stunned to move or something like this.
I have no idea.
Tell me you know who David Attenborough is.
I don't. That's
He's the
boomer
old British
nonsense,
guy
and I
who
don't
did
entertain
British.
it.
He's the
Chris?
British.
Chris, are you there?
Yeah, can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Yes, I
Great.
can hear you, yeah.
Okay, so sorry about that. I've never been on a live like this before. I was having technical
Well, now you have.
difficulties.
Yeah, welcome in.
But ultimately, I just want to sort of say this first. I really respect you guys. I've been watching your lives for a few months. I'm a Christian, you know, I believe in God, that sort of thing. And the way you argued God drove me to bringing one of your points to a theologian. And I wanted to respond with what he said, and ultimately maybe we could start from there.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
Yeah,
I'm,
sure.
I'm glad. I'm glad that the point made you, because I don't know. I don't, my unpopular opinion is that my goal isn't necessarily to take people away from religion. I don't know. I just kind of like determining what's true. So if like a point that was made by me or Blitz or whoever made you have to evaluate something and think more deeply about something in your worldview, then I think that that's really cool. I think that that's a huge win. But yeah, I'd love to. What's the point?
No, it is. Just to tap on that really quick, it is a really cool point because ultimately your question, first I felt angry that you brought it up in the way that you did. You basically said that I've heard you argue before because because people think the Bible is perfect who are Christians, and maybe you want to, restate your claim better than me, but you basically said that because there's been rape and war and murder in the Bible directed by God. Therefore, it proves that it's infallible, the Bible itself. Maybe you want to lay out your argument again, just so I'm sure about that.
Yeah, just that it's like I think it I think there's kind of like a rock and a hard place here. Um I think that theology pretty robustly, at least like the common theologies, pretty robustly commit you to saying that everything God does is good. There's explicit verses that say as much, that everything God does is good. Um, so the implication of that is that if something appears in the Bible and it features God doing it, either like the Bible is just completely wrong about God doing it, in which case like the Bible itself has major issues. You know, the Bible itself is like full of like falsehoods. Then if all these instances just didn't happen, the alternative is that you have to affirm like really unintuitive conclusions, like it was good when God commanded the genociding of the Amalekite babies. You know, God says take the lives of the men, the women, the children, the infants. um you know, you'd have to say that that's good, but that's like super unintuitive to me.
But ultimately, yeah, I could see that line of logic, assuming that everything in the Bible was perfectly how God wanted it. And ultimately, what my church said, I brought it back, and they basically said, "Hey, we don't look as Lutherans at the Bible as biblical literalism, but literary criticism." And so we criticize the Bible because we know that man wrote the Bible over a period of time, and man himself is infallible, not God. And so, therefore, what was written in the Bible, we criticize it because we know that man could have messed up while he was writing the Bible because he was selfish and had free will to do that. And that was sort of the answer from my Lutheran church, is they're saying, hey, number one, as Lutherans, we don't debate the Bible. We see it as something that's ultimately we're trying to understand more. And as we understand it, we find that man wrote it and it can be infallible because man wrote it. And that basically takes out the linchpins of your argument, because it shows that the Bible isn't de jure applied as if God wrote it. It's de jure applied as if man wrote it, and it could have mistakes in it ultimately.
So
That has problems though,
yeah, go for it.
because once you acknowledge that there can be mistakes, then you have to ask, well, was Jesus turning water into wine a mistake? Was the resurrection a mistake?
Hmm.
Was the ascension to heaven a mistake? Was Paul's vision a mistake? Like
Yeah.
once you say, ah, well, there could be mistakes here. Like this was written by man after all. They could have been mistaken. Where does it end?
It ends at the point where man has free will and man can be selfish, like slavery. That's point blank what I asked. What you guys
Hmm.
got me to ask my pastor was, why is slavery in there and how can that be perfect? And the answer was ultimately that man's selfish motive drove slavery, and he wrote the Bible that way to gain self fulfillment and power and all these things that man want. And ultimately, God wasn't directing him to do that, that he mistook ultimately God's commands and fulfilled a lot of it with his own selfish desires, like human beings would. And so none of the Bible, according to Lutherans, and I'm a Lutheran, I was baptized a Lutheran 5 years ago,
Hmm.
believe that it's, you know, we should literally take the Bible for how it is. That ultimately we should criticize it because man in his infallible way wrote it.
Yeah, so kind of like reiterate Blitz's point, but maybe like, you know, I'll like end it with a question to like direct the conversation. I think that this is like, you know, a fine response. I certainly think it's better than biting the bullet and saying that these things are good, or that it was like totally justified. But it just opens up a completely different issue, which is I have no idea how we can determine what in the Bible is true and what in the Bible is false at that point. I don't know how we determine that the resurrection happened. I don't know how we determine that God isn't just a literary creation. I don't know how we determine any of that. So maybe the question to ask is, how, given a passage, how can you determine if it's true or if it's just something that man made up?
You can't ultimately. And that's what makes the Bible not de jure applied information and knowledge. It needs to be put through the lens that a fallible human being created it. And ultimately, you question the Bible, but I question your understanding of the universe, because can you tell me point blank what is outside of the observable universe, sir? Do you know what that is?
This feels like a pivot. So, and we can talk about this. I have no problem. Like, we can get to
Oh
this.
no, I'm not trying to pivot. I just in a conversation, I didn't want to beat a dead horse. I have nothing new to add to that, so I was just moving on out of respect. I'm
Well,
sorry.
oh, sure. No, I get you. I get you. But maybe to like put a bow on this, if there's no way of knowing whether or not the God in the Bible is actually real, because there's no way of knowing like which parts of the Bible are real or not real, I guess I just think that that's like a major issue for the worldview, that we have no idea if any of this is true, that it could all just be made up. Like God could literally just be a made up character, and you kind of remain like, I don't know, like do you remain like agnostic to whether or not God is just like a literary creation?
No, because I feel God and God's love in my heart. Like I was a steadfast atheist, and I know you don't like people telling their stories. I'm not trying to do that. I'm just for reflection of this point. I know what it's like not to have the love of God in my heart as an atheist versus having the love of God in my heart. And ultimately, God didn't come to me in my life on a personal level because of the church. It came because of an insane event that happened. Um, but yeah, it's like I truly do believe in God, and it makes a lot of sense. Like, I imagine even if the literary authors of the Bible were under pressure by what the Bible would call evil. There's all these new factors that come into play with this, and yeah, it makes sense that man is not a god. In the Lutheran belief system, we believe that all human beings can be sinners or saints. And so
But
ultimately that we don't believe like what Catholics believe, that like there's saints like Saint Christopher and all these people in the Bible that have
sure.
like special power, but that ultimately any man could be special or evil. And so I could see if there was an opposition of that which is good, that when something good like the Bible was being written, that which is not good would attack that person that
But
is in line with God, and try to get them to put things like slavery in the Bible.
but
So
look,
even
look,
so, I
this
think
is
this point shows more of a
your
force that there could be good and evil, because evil
look,
overtook
look,
good at the
Chris.
time.
Your view can perfectly well account for why there's slavery in the Bible. Totally agree. It can account for that. But if at this point you are now stuck in the position where you cannot determine whether or not a particular verse or chapter or story or whatever in the Bible is true, you now have no justification for thinking that Jesus came back from the dead. And that is a required belief to be Christian, right? You can't be Christian and not think that and think that Jesus didn't resurrect. But if you can't trust the stories in the Bible now because you have no way of figuring out whether they're true or not, where does that belief come from? How can you justify that belief?
That belief comes from that like I've heard you guys argue that if all the literature was destroyed in the world, and God was, I mean, if the earth restarted over, that ultimately there would be like science would rediscover physics and things of that nature, but nobody would rediscover the Bible. But maybe they wouldn't rediscover the Bible that was written by infallible man,
That
but they would discover God, because I discovered
Okay, but that
God
wasn't my
without the
question.
Bible. But I
You can be a
discovered God without
theist,
the Bible.
Chris. You can be a
You
theist,
don't need to believe that
Chris.
Jesus Christ
Chris,
was risen
I,
again to
I
believe in
understand
God,
that,
sir.
Chris. Chris, you are a Lutheran. You do believe that Jesus rose from the dead.
Yes, I
You
do.
can be a theist and reject the Bible. 100% I agree. But you are not that. You're a Lutheran, which means that you believe that Jesus rose from the dead. And I'm asking, how do you justify that belief?
Because the story of that has been brought over thousands of years. And that's what I think is incredible and
But
impactful
so
about the
the
Bible.
story of slavery, the story of, the ancient Hebrews having slaves from their next door neighbors also existed for thousands of years. That doesn't make it true, but that doesn't make it, something that actually happened. You've already agreed that we can't trust these passages because they could be written by fallible men.
Yeah, exactly.
But the story about Jesus' resurrection was written by fallible men. So just because the story has existed for 2,000 years doesn't mean that we can trust it.
I know, but there's so much more greater than the Bible. Like that's what atheists can't comprehend is actually having a relationship with God. And there's so much more than just the Bible.
Well,
There,
so
there
I'm
really
Okay, but that
is.
has
maybe because I feel like maybe I would be satisfied if we could just agree that your belief in the resurrection is like unjustified. Would you agree that your
No,
belief in the
no,
resurrection
it's
is
not
unjustified?
unjustified.
What
No,
justifies it then?
what justifies it is that it's been carried through institutions, through schools, through churches, through um, amazing literary works. You know, for an example, Socrates. You guys love Socrates. Those guys talked about gods, and ultimately, I
Not the
think that they.
resurrection.
I know, but hold on. To my point is not about the resurrection. It's the fact that people throughout
the
history
question
have
is about the resurrection.
Yeah.
no, but people throughout history have seen God in different forms, and
Okay, but the
so
question's about the resurrection specifically.
Yeah.
but it doesn't have to be just the resurrection.
But
But
that's
that's the question.
Well, I don't know what else you want from me. I believe in the resurrection because it's been brought over years, thousands of years of stories, and it is in the Bible. The Bible could be infallible, but my belief goes so much far beyond just what the Bible is. And you two, as atheists, can't comprehend that because you've never had a relationship with
Wait,
God.
so the justification that you're giving applies equally to the slavery in the Bible. Do you acknowledge that the slavery in the Bible has also been brought over
It's actually older.
thousands of years? That it's also been brought through all these schools and institutions?
Because man infallible created that, not God.
But do you acknowledge that it's been brought over throughout all these millennia?
Yeah, obviously, because it was written down.
Sure. So if your belief in the resurrection is justified by the fact that it's been brought down and passed down for thousands of years, then that would also require you to believe in biblical slavery.
No, I don't believe in it because I believe infallible man wrote that part of the
But you
Bible.
but you don't believe that fallible men wrote the part of the Bible about Jesus' resurrection?
Because that aligned with reality. Like he was
How do
actually,
you know? Were you there?
killed at the cross. I've heard you two admit that you believe
Hmm?
in Jesus and that Jesus existed.
Yeah.
Do you or do you not?
Yeah,
Yeah,
we
sure.
do. We don't
that's
think he
that.
resurrected.
I believe Jesus existed. Listen, you're not going to
You
get
believe
me.
more than that. You believe he resurrected. So we just want to know what justifies the belief that he resurrected.
I'll say it again. You're not going to get a different answer out of me. That the story has existed for thousands of years and it's been carried over.
This applies to the slavery verses too.
And the Hebrews existed. They were a real people that existed historically.
Right? Do you speak?
So that aligns.
Can you read the Hebrew Bible?
I can read Hebrew, yeah.
Okay, so do you think
Not
there's
that it's
a big
relevant, though.
distinction? Do you think that I know, but you're just beating a dead horse. Like you're not going to get a different answer out of me. You've asked this 3 times. I don't know if you,
Well,
in a respectful debate, when somebody gives an answer, you just move on, right, to a
I
new
disagree.
point. Or
So, and listen, right? Like, I don't mind. We're not trying to like trap you or get you. It's okay if you don't know or if you don't have an answer. It's
no, I
fine.
do have
You
an
could
exact
even say
answer,
like
but
it's a matter of faith.
I
Like
have
I
an
believe it
answer.
on faith. Like you could even say that, and that would be fine.
Okay,
But
yeah,
what
I
we
do
can't
believe it
have
on
is
faith.
just
That's
like,
my answer.
okay, sure.
That's
As
my
long
answer.
as we
I have
acknowledge that
faith.
it's an unjustified belief, I'm totally fine moving on to what you wanted to talk about next.
Sure, yeah. I mean, I have faith. Yeah.
Okay.
So if that's an unjustified belief, then that's fine.
Sure. Okay.
Okay.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
okay. Go ahead.
ultimately, I had an amazing experience when I studied at ASU. They have this beautiful
Go Devils.
observatory. Yeah, they're a good team, but they have this beautiful observatory, and they brought our astronomy class into this 360-degree like IMAX dome where we lean back, and an astronomer came out and walked us through in this 3D world, the size from an atom to the outside of the observable universe. And so we really got to see that biological line of thinking of the universe. And I thought it was really, really brilliant. But it also led me to my question to you is do either of you two have any scientific fact of what's outside of the observable universe?
I mean, so we can speculate about what's outside the observable universe using like modern scientific ideas, but it's not observable. So barring some other form of data that we haven't yet collected, nobody has any clue what's outside there.
So you would have faith that something exists out there that you know about?
No, I would be agnostic about it. I'd be agnostic about what's out there. Like, we don't know. We can speculate, but we don't know.
Oh, okay. But that would require a decent matter of faith, would it not?
To be agnostic.
Faith in what?
Faith in believing you think you understand what's outside of the observable universe,
But I
or you can
don't.
admit that you don't know anything outside of the observable universe.
That's what he's
It's
saying.
one or
That's,
the other.
that's what I said. We
Yeah,
don't
he's
know.
agnostic.
We can speculate,
Okay.
but we don't know.
Yeah.
Okay, sorry, I misunderstood that. I'm sorry. Okay, so since you don't know what's outside of the observable universe, how can you suspect that you have the intelligence to know what's going on inside if you don't understand the entire framework of the universe?
Because we can see what's inside. So we
Well,
can
if
figure
you-
out what's inside, regardless of what's going on outside.
If you don't know what's happening in Somalia, how can you trust that you can know what's happening inside your own home? What? I'm not really sure what
It's
the
just that
connection
you
is.
fully don't understand the universe as two human beings, and you can speculate that you understand its mechanics, and that makes no logical sense at all.
What? So to be clear, we can like do science to figure out how the universe, the observable universe, works, right? Like we agree on that.
But there's so much more to this universe that you can't even
Maybe.
comprehend.
Maybe there is. Maybe outside the
Yeah, I'm
observable
sure
universe,
there
there's
is.
stuff. Well, I mean, now you're the one having faith, right?
Yeah, I do
maybe
have faith.
maybe there is stuff outside the observable universe that doesn't behave at all like we expect it to. Maybe it's all sorts of weird stuff outside the observable universe. When we do physics, we're talking about the observable universe. You'll have some people who can like, try to like make continuity arguments from like mathematical realism and stuff like this that you can make descriptions about what's going on outside the observable universe. But as far as I'm concerned, that's speculation. Like
Right.
when we do science, we're talking about what we can see and observe and measure and experimentally test, and that's the whole business.
Well, have you ever thought as a scientist that like you can't explain what's in what's in an atom? There's parts of it you can't fully observe under a microscope and these sorts of things. And so
that's not true.
why is it the logical deduction that there's a lot in an atom that you can't observe, and
Like what?
like dark matter itself exists in
That's
an
not
atom.
that's not in atoms.
Yes, it is.
At least we have no evidence to think so. According to whom?
I'm talking about dark matter as in the void, the blackness in the space, like what we can't see, but we know something exists in that realm, if that makes sense.
It doesn't.
In an atom,
so the atom.
there's only a certain amount of matter in an atom, but there's a lot of it that looks like it's empty, but we know it's not empty. We know there's something else there.
I'm
So
sorry, Dr.
atoms
Blitz.
aren't empty.
Yes,
Sorry?
I'm sorry, Dr.
they're-
Blitz.
Yeah, they hit the second tower. Atoms aren't empty. It's a 100-year-old misconception. And like
So
one
there's
of the
not
first
a
things that
clear
you
part
do.
of an atom. It's all matter. That's not true.
So one of the first things that you do when you take a quantum mechanics course for the very first time, maybe the third thing that you do or the second thing that you do, is you exactly with 100% precision describe a hydrogen atom mathematically. You pin it down, and it exactly matches observations. So like we know what's in an atom. We can describe it fully. Things can be clear while still being made of matter. Glass is clear, but that's not because there's no atoms there. It's because it's clear. It interacts differently with light. So yeah, I mean, like the point is that atoms aren't empty. Their whole business is an atom is a nucleus surrounded by an electron cloud, or multiple electron clouds. They're of the things that are not understood, atoms are not in that list. Atoms are one of the things that we do understand very, very well, because we've been studying them for so long.
Okay, if still there's a lot inside of the atom that looks clear is my exact point. And
I don't know what you
been
mean by
su-
looks
there's been-
clear.
the-
What do you mean by looks
an
clear?
atom is not 100% matter. It has electrons, it has neutrons.
Electrons
and-
are matter. Neutrons are matter.
But it's not 100% matter, sir. There's
What?
still
Sure it is.
there's still
That's
dead
how we define
space.
it.
There's still dead space in an atom.
No, there's not.
Yes, there is. Okay, pull up a picture of an atom for me, sir. Can you pull up a
Okay.
picture of an atom?
I can't. I don't think I can share my screen.
Oh, okay. I don't think I can.
But like, if all you have to do is look up like atomic orbital, and if you just look at like the S1 orbital, you'll see that it's just a solid sphere.
But don't you think that trying to describe these things, these atoms and science, this is my last question, and then you
At
can
one
let
S, I
me
should say.
go. This is my last question, and then you guys can let me go. Thanks for having me up here. I hope
Yeah,
I've
of
been
course. Thanks for
respectful.
coming up.
I haven't tried to disrespect you in any way.
No, you're good.
Um, but yeah, ultimately, I'm glad we get to have this conversation because points of misunderstanding on my end just lead me into a deeper discovery of God. So I appreciate these
Mhm.
conversations and yeah, anyways, my last point is: do you think it's possible that science is just simply describing in a human mode of thought production what God has already created?
Depends. Okay, gosh, I don't
It's
want to
like
get like,
logically possible, I guess.
yeah, it's like, we can imagine that being the case, but I just have no reason to think God exists, and I have no reason to think that like, if God exists, then it's possible that science is doing that. But I have pretty good reason to think that God doesn't exist. Um, I'll show some pictures of atoms to the TikTok, just so
Oh,
everyone
I
can
wish I
get,
could see it. Gosh
yeah,
dang, I don't think I
so
can teacup.
so we can get like a basic
Yeah, and sorry, these
like
are
model
arguments
of
just
it.
coming from a layman. I'm not a physicist or a biblical scholar.
Yeah, just getting some atoms up in
These are just
there.
honest thoughts that I've had in my head. And if we clarify and there's some things that I learn, I appreciate it. So thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Hey, well, thanks for coming up. Appreciate
Definitely.
it.
Yeah, cool. Well, thanks for having me. And I hope you guys have a blessed day. If there's
Mhm.
more examination I have to do after this conversation, and maybe in a month or two, I'll swing
Yeah,
back by or
absolutely.
Yeah,
something.
please do.
Yeah, I
Best of
appreciate it.
luck.
All right.
All right, we have two super chats. From Dohar BD Jr. with the €1. Thank you. We appreciate €1, even though it's actually 99 cents. And then from Aaron Leitz with the $10. Quote, just have faith is not a reliable way of knowing anything. That's true. That's the whole business. I mean, like, look, if you want it, like, if you do have faith, more power to you, I guess. But like, this has not been a reliable way of like predicting how the world works. Which is fine, I suppose, if that's not your goal, to try to understand what the world's doing. But
Yeah. Well, I don't know. And this is a field of philosophical inquiry. I'm sure that there are articles on this, but there's an ethical component to belief. It's unethical to hold specific beliefs. And one belief that you can argue it's unethical to hold is a belief with no evidence, that this is irresponsible. Believing something on faith just because it makes you feel good is probably not ethical. For example, someone left a comment. I'm going to use this example. Stockton Rush, he made his Titan submergible and he had faith that it wasn't going to collapse. And then it did. And it's his fault. He did that. A belief in the absence of evidence is bad. Like, you shouldn't have those.
so I would say that that's true in almost all cases, but in principle, it's at least in principle possible to have faith in a way that doesn't influence your decision making. To have faith in something, right?
I'm not sure.
Like if I had faith that there was the invisible teapot orbiting Jupiter, that wouldn't influence any of my decision making processes.
Sure.
At least one could imagine that it wouldn't. And so that faith, I don't think you could construe as unethical.
I'm not sure.
And also, actually,
I think,
pushing
okay,
back
wait,
again,
maybe
I
the
actually
way to
think that
say
some
it is
faiths
that, like, what it is you become morally responsible for literally any harm that your belief causes.
That's fair. I do think, though, that it's possible to have faith and that be the morally right thing to do, because it could be that your unjustified belief leads to, for coincidental reasons perhaps, leads to moral actions, right?
Ooh, I don't know about that. Because at that point, I feel like, so that to me would be like if Stockton Rush's expedition went off without a hitch. They did all of it.
No, it would be like if it went off and they discovered the cure for cancer while down there.
Sure. I mean, even then, I still think that like an unjustified belief, right? Like it could have led to disaster because of your irresponsibility and it just didn't. Like at that point, you'd be morally lucky. So we wouldn't say that you're like morally praiseworthy for that. We might even say that you're morally blameworthy for it because of all the things that could have happened. That would be like reasonable to assume would
Yeah,
happen if only your belief was
that's
justified.
a fair point. I mean, so suppose that there was a belief that, and then we can bring up a guest. I know
Sure.
that this is, I'm just playing with this idea, but suppose that there was a belief that couldn't have any negative consequences, but having this belief led you to the conclusion that you should volunteer at soup kitchens, right? I suppose you could probably imagine such a belief that, like, if you um, if you believe in the soup kitchen god, then um, you'll sleep better at night.
Hmm.
And one of the things to do when you believe in the soup kitchen god is you work at a soup kitchen. Well, I don't think that can hurt anybody,
Sure, but
right?
then I'd say like the morally praiseworthy thing in that circumstance is the soup kitchen, not the belief.
Right. But the beliefs can lead to positive moral outcomes
I mean,
without
I agree with
necessarily
that.
invoking negative moral outcomes.
I totally agree with that. I just don't think in that circumstance the belief itself would be the thing that would be like morally praising.
Yeah, that's probably true because yeah, that's
I don't
I
know.
don't think that
These are definitely good points. These are things that I'll think about.
yeah, we should talk about this at a later date.
Yeah,
Anyway, we have a
all right.
guest, CW.
CW, how's it going? CW?
Hello.
You are
Oh, I think
way too young.
that's a child. That's a fetus.
You got to be 18 or older.
Very.
Hey, how's it going, Chris?
Hello.
Yeah.
Howdy.
Hi guys.
Yeah.
So I was listening to you talk to the other Chris a second ago, and I wanted to touch up on the slavery topic, and then
Yeah.
what you guys were just talking
Sure.
about actually had a lot in it, not to do with the slavery, but just a lot in it that made me want to talk. Um, I'll start with what you guys were just talking about. The Bible actually agrees with Ian that your I'm sorry, I have a bad memory. Can you repeat what you said before about how like my belief has a big cause on my outcome and that like some
Um,
beliefs are unethical because of the cause?
Well, so my point is just that it's unethical to hold a belief if you have evidence against it and you have no evidence for it just to make you feel good. That's
Right.
an unethical thing to do.
Yeah, so the
yeah,
Bible actually agrees with that. That's one of the reasons why it says to study the Bible, because you can't base your ethics and your beliefs on something that you don't know. And so you actually are supposed to go and have a good understanding of what you're trying to tell yourself to do through the Bible.
Okay.
And then to jump to the slavery, how would you guys classify a slave?
Just a person owned as property.
Okay. And then, so do you think that is inherently wrong, 100%?
I think that the circumstances would need to be pretty dire, right? It's like the only circumstances that I could possibly imagine is if you're like living under like some authoritarian hellscape and it's like, yeah, take this person as your possession or we'll like execute their entire family, them and their entire family will like torture them to death. Well, at that point, maybe it's not unethical to own them for the sake of them not getting like tortured to death. But it certainly wouldn't be ethical to treat them in the way that God is prescribing, like that it's optional for you to like beat them with a rod, like it says in Exodus 21. So, and in all but the most extreme circumstances, like philosophical edge cases, I'd say, yeah, it's pretty impermissible. You shouldn't do that.
Okay. So what would you say if I respected you both enough that I was like, I really want to help out what these guys are doing, so I'm actually going to offer myself so they could just use me to get through whatever their message is? Would you consider that
That's
to be a bad thing?
that's generally called volunteering, and volunteering,
No,
importantly,
I don't
you can
mean
just
like
leave.
I don't mean like a portion of me. I mean like I'm going to sign over my rights as a human to you two. Would you consider that a bad thing if that's something I'm willing to do and I want to do?
I don't think it's something you're capable of doing. I don't
You
think that you can sign over your rights.
I
At
believe
least not fundamental rights.
I believe that there are specific cases where you can. Maybe not in America, but I think in America you can. But in other
Well,
countries,
no, I'm
for sure.
I'm making kind of like a ethical claim here. I don't think that I don't think that that's something that's possible. I don't think that like I think that, you know, as far as like fundamental human dignity and freedom and like those kinds of things, like right to expression, I think that these are things that literally you can't give away.
Well,
Like it just like you can give away your property. That's fine. You can say, here, you own this now, and you can relinquish control, and you can even give over like you can even like make an agreement to like trade time, but like I don't think that you can fundamentally give up like
Well, yeah,
your
but
sense of like your dignity and things like that.
to that regard, I would say that my words are my property. So
Words are
I
your property. What?
yeah,
No,
I have
property are like
ownership.
objects that you have ownership on.
Yeah, but
Words aren't objects.
I'm talking more on a moral standpoint, not a literal. So I'm just saying that like I own my words and I'm responsible for what happens with my words. I'm responsible for what my words do, all of the above. And so if I were to be like, all right, I'm going to give this person my ability to speak. So if they say I'm not going to speak, that's their call, not mine.
So I think it's kind of weird, right? Because
I
I
would
don't
agree. Yeah.
mind. I don't mind if people. I don't think it's morally bad. There are some cases where it is morally bad, but I don't think
Yeah.
it's like per se morally bad if somebody puts themselves into a position where they're just going to listen to like all the things that you say. You know, you certainly have the freedom to do that. They certainly have the freedom to accept you to do that. As long as everyone's consenting, everyone is in like good mental health, nobody is like deeply mentally ill. Although I'm skeptical that that could happen without somebody being deeply mentally ill.
I would agree.
Assuming all of that, sure, that's fine. But you would still the one thing that you couldn't do is not have a right to revoke this. You would still, in this circumstance, have a right to say, never mind. You would say, you know, I'm no longer going to be like the person who listens to you, be your slave. I'm not going to do it anymore. Goodbye.
Well,
You would still
that
need to have
depends
that right. I don't think
because
it's ethical to have someone where they don't have the right to say no.
well, that depends because there are situations. So, like the CIA has no ability to talk about things that are classified. And so, let's say I willingly became a slave to the Emperor of China. You know, I can't just back out of that because I'm gonna know too much. And so, there's a problem with me just backing out. But the point that I'm trying to bring up here is I believe that's how slavery is supposed to be. I think it's supposed to be, oh, I want to dedicate myself to this person because they're that good and
It was not
respectful.
voluntary.
Yeah.
I'm aware, yeah.
Okay.
So
Then this is just not going to be analogous.
that's just what I'm saying. Like that's what I believe it's supposed to be like, and I think that humans corrupted it. And
Wait, but like in the Bible, it wasn't like that.
Yeah.
yeah, I believe humans corrupted the idea of slavery. And
Well,
so we
but
started abusing our slaves. We started doing all these things to our
who
slaves.
gave
Now
the
I'm going
law
to
that
bring
said that you could abuse your slaves, though?
multiple different rulers of different countries,
In the
including Pharaoh.
Bible, who gave the law?
Including Pharaoh. Pharaoh was someone who
In
went out in the Bible in
for the
Exodus, and
Israelites, who gave
yeah,
the Israelites the laws related to how they can take care of their slaves, like what they can do to them.
nobody. The Pharaoh was the one who had the decision on how to treat slaves.
So it came from God, at least
Yeah.
if you trust the Torah.
I don't.
Maybe you don't, which is reasonable.
Well, no, I'm not saying that. I'm saying I don't know what you're talking about. I've never
Sure.
seen that.
Exodus 21, 20 through 21, this is after they did the Exodus from Egypt, and God is giving the laws to Moses and the Israelites. When a slave owner strikes a male or female slave with a rod and the slave dies immediately, the owner shall be punished. But if the slave survives a day or two, there's no punishment, for the slave is the owner's property. So this is God giving a law that says you can beat your slaves as hard as you want as long as they don't die. You can beat your slaves.
Okay. And then,
Is
so
that,
if you,
is that ethical though?
I wouldn't agree. No. But that's one thing that you got to take into consideration when you're reading the Old Testament to the New Testament. The Old Testament is supposed to be a mirror to show us that we're dirty. So it's God's laws. We don't hold up appropriately to God's laws. That's why we need Christ, because we're all sinners. None of us are capable of perfectly upholding
Hold on.
God's laws.
Now I'm confused. God, the whole beating your slave thing, that was God's law.
I would have to read more on.
But like
Exodus.
that was like one of the commandments, right? One of the 613.
Like I said, I don't know enough about that particular statement. I don't know the context or what's going on there.
Well, if it is the case that God gave this law, would you agree that there's a contradiction in the Bible?
I would believe that I don't know enough. And then, like, if I did learn enough to be like, all right, this is everything, I would probably, under the circumstances that I know now, be like, that's not morally ethical. But I think there's more to it than just beat your slave with a rod. And the reason I say this is because in the New Testament, it goes on to show how to treat slaves. And so Jesus himself says, treat your slaves with fairness and justice, meaning don't kill them like an animal in the field, or don't treat them like an animal in the field. The other one is slaves are not to be overworked, and we're to have rest on the day of Sabbath. So I can't just tell them to work all day in the cotton fields, and when they pass out, just throw them in a hole. And then we're
Why
not supposed to,
Why not thou shalt not own slaves?
because I can willingly give you my being. I can hand over who I am to somebody else in servitude to them.
But why not thou shalt not beat your slaves?
It does. I'm getting there. It says prohibition of harsh treatment. So the Bible explicitly forbids mistreatment of slaves and causing physical harm.
So then there's just going to be a contradiction in the Bible, because whatever verse you're citing, if such a verse exists, is just in contest with the Exodus verse that we just read you. So
Well,
at
the other
that point,
one
there would just
isn't
be a
saying
contradiction.
to beat your slaves. It's saying that if he doesn't kill his slave, then that's his property.
Yeah, so if I beat the heck out of my slave, I beat the bricks out of them. I beat them harsher than you
Yeah,
can
you beat me to an
fathom.
inch of my life.
Yeah, and you live for a couple of days. What's the punishment there?
Well, the point is I have to live, period. So I can't die from your abuse.
Do you think that's an answer to the question?
The punishment for dying to abuse would be you're going to now be taken hold of it,
Do
and under
you think that
Moses'
that's an
laws,
answer
you'd
to
be
my
stoned.
question?
Yeah.
Okay, what do you think the question was?
I think the question, I can't remember. I'm sorry. I
Yeah,
have bad
so if you
memory.
beat the heck out of your slave, if you really like viciously beat them,
Yeah.
according to this Exodus law, you beat them to an inch of their life, like horrible stuff. But they survive a day or two. What's the punishment?
Let's see. It says anyone to attack is in the wrong.
According to the Exodus verse that we're reading.
If anyone schemes and kills someone deliberately, that person is taken from my altar and put to death.
So the answer to the question is nothing. There's no punishment. I'll read the verse again. When a slave owner strikes a male or female slave with a rod, and the slave dies immediately, the owner shall be punished. But if the slave survives a day or two, there is no punishment, for the slave is the owner's property. So the answer to the question is that if you beat your slave to an inch of their life, you beat the hell out of your slave, there is no punishment for that, as long as you don't kill them.
So there may be a contradiction there. I'll have to look into that one. But going off of what I know, the New Testament does say you're not supposed to be mistreating them, so it would be wrong to beat them within an inch of their life. And then the other thing is they're supposed to be paid for their work. They're not supposed to be doing this for free. It says,
Well, there's a word for servant and there's a word for slave, and they're not the same word.
And this is for slaves. This is how Jesus tells to treat slaves. And
Then
so
Jesus says to pay slaves? What's the verse?
Let me find it. I'm sorry, I'm reading off of my notes.
You're fine, notes are good.
Make sure you're double tapping on that screen, dropping that follow, dropping that like, dropping that subscribe, doing all that good stuff.
And ring the bell.
So the passages that I'm reading from is going to be from Colossians 3:22 through 24, and then Ephesians 6:5 through 8.
Galatians 2:24?
Colossians.
Cool.
So Colossians 3:22, you say, through 24 or something like this. So slaves, obey your earthly masters in everything, and do it not only when their eye is on you and to curry their favor, but with sincerity of heart and reverence. Whatever you do, work at it with all your heart, working as for the Lord, not for human masters, since you know that you will receive an inheritance from the Lord as a reward. It is the Lord Christ you are serving. Anyone who does wrong, you will be repaid for their wrongs, and there is no favoritism. That's the verse you're referring to in Colossians.
And then
Well, that
And
just
then
doesn't.
Ephesians.
To be clear, that just doesn't say that you need to pay your slaves. But let's
So
read the second
it's-
verse.
Ephesians says, slaves, obey your earthly masters with respect and fear and with sincerity of heart, just as you would obey Christ. Obey them not only to win their favor when their eye is on you, but as slaves of Christ, doing the will of God from your heart. Serve wholeheartedly as if you were serving the Lord, not people, because you know that the Lord will reward each one for whatever good they do, whether they're slave or free. It doesn't seem like the slaves are supposed to be paid.
Yeah, neither of those say that
Yeah,
you should
not
pay your
fine.
slaves.
I could be wrong. Hang on.
Did you just
I
get
mean,
these
like,
passages
definitely-
from like AI?
No,
That's my guess. So definitely the New Testament and the Christian Bible is like definitely better on slavery than like the Hebrew Bible is, because the Hebrew Bible is older and they had, you know, perhaps more primitive institutions. But like it's definitely still not good on the matter.
Yeah. Hang on. 'Cause- So that's talking about Exodus. Okay, so it's in Deuteronomy. My bad. Deuteronomy 24:14 through 15.
Deuteronomy.
All right. Do not take advantage of a hired worker. Do not take advantage of a hired worker who is poor and needy, whether that worker is a fellow Israelite or a foreigner residing in one of your towns. Pay them
that's
their
talking
wages
about
each
hired.
day before sunset, because they are poor and are counting on it. Otherwise, they may cry to the Lord against you, and you will be guilty of sin. That one?
See, but that's talking about a hired person. That's
Yep.
not
It
talking
is.
about a
It's not a
slave.
slave.
Yep.
Right.
That indeed would be our critique. Yeah.
Deals with punishment for harming a slave. Treat masters. Hang on. There's neither Jew nor Greek. There's neither slave nor free. I don't see it.
I'm skeptical that it exists.
Now I'm wondering if it's more like a Hebrew, or like slaves were to be fairly receive their wages, were not to work during the Sabbath and not be treated harshly. The ones that it's bringing up is Exodus 20, Job 31. Like there's a bunch. That
Wait,
it's
when
trying
you
to
say
bring
that
up
it's
right now.
bringing up, what is it?
This is from the Dallas Baptist University.
Okay, I'll just go there.
Do you want me to share the link in the chat?
Is it Dr. Philip Irving?
It just says the Bible and slavery. Oh yeah, Dr. Philip Irving.
Okay, so
It
right,
says
so I'm just
early
so
modern
which
resources and then the Bible and slavery.
yeah. So which section are you looking at?
It's scrolling down to the 6 where it says the Old Testament.
Okay, yeah. So I'm seeing all these references.
And then
Okay,
it goes
I'll just
down to
punch these
7.
in. I'll just punch these in and we can just look at them.
Okay.
Okay, so Exodus 20:10 says your male and female servants should not do any work on the Sabbath. That's one of the references. Nor any foreigner residing in your towns. So it's saying, yeah, your slaves can take a day off. Okay. Job 31 is talking about, if I have denied justice to any of my servants, whether male or female, when they had a grievance against me, what will I do when God confronts me? What will I answer when called to account? Did not he who made me in the womb make them? Did not the same one form both of us within our mothers? That says nothing about hiring people. Deuteronomy, we've already read. That's about a hired worker. Leviticus 22 is talking about how if a priest buys a slave with money, or the slaves are born in his household, they can eat his food. So the slaves can eat the food they're allowed to eat. Malachi is talking about adulterers, sorcerers, and perjurers, those who defraud laborers of their wages. Laborers and slaves are not the same thing. Leviticus is talking about If a man sleeps with a female slave who is promised to another man, but who has not been ransomed or given her freedom, there must be due punishment, yet they are not to be put to death because she had not been freed. The man, however, must bring a ram to the entrance to the tent of meeting for a guilt offering to the Lord. With the ram of the guilt offering, the priest is to make atonement. So this says nothing about paying slaves. Exodus 21 is talking about beating slaves.
Why would it include 21,
Exodus-
20 through 21?
Oh, because
Well, it says
if you do kill
26 through
them,
23.
it also says 20 through 21.
Yeah,
It does say if you do kill them, then there's punishment, right?
Yeah. 26.
An owner who hits a
Yeah, it's
26
talking
through
about hitting
32 is
them.
not
Like you
better.
can't like break their eye, break their tooth. You
Yeah,
can't do that.
so none of these say anything about slaves receiving
Yeah.
wages.
I think probably one thing that you should be asking yourself, one thing that I'd definitely be asking myself, why the hell did this professor on this website lie to me? I don't know, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Why did a professor lie to me 9 consecutive times? That's what I would be asking.
Yeah, no, I'm not happy that like that's something that they brought up when it doesn't say that specifically.
Now, if you
See-
wanted to be generous to the professor, you could say just wages for a slave is $0, and then also they get food and a day off on the weekend.
I don't know, because I don't. The way that I kind of view slave is different than the way that we've seen it throughout history. But it's hard for me to give an example for that now because my examples I'd have to go look for more or see if I'm just straight wrong.
Okay.
I mean, like, generally speaking, slaves haven't been well treated in history.
I
That is just
definitely
a general
agree.
thing.
I don't think that hardly anybody had or treated their slaves well, and we see that throughout all history. There were very few slaves where they're like, I want to stay with this master because he actually treats me like a human.
Yeah. Or wait, are you saying that there haven't been very much?
Yeah, like I know of a few. I can't exactly remember. I think George
agree.
Washington's slaves actually enjoyed being his slaves because it was better than the alternatives.
I don't know if I'd say that they enjoyed it.
Yeah,
It might have been better
I'm just
than the
saying it was
alternatives.
preferred to the alternatives.
I think that that's highly unlikely. I don't think that there's. I think the number of slaves who enjoy slavery is probably in the vast, like incomprehensibly vast minority. I
Yeah.
think you're probably looking at like, of all the people who have ever been slaves, maybe like under 100 of them throughout all of history have enjoyed their slavery.
Well, I'd say more than that because we know that a lot of these, I don't know what they're called, but they're like the slave ringers. They're like the head slave. And so like they get better treatment than the other slaves because they're in charge of the other slaves and yada yada.
But compared to that, like if you had to be that, or you had the opportunity to be like a free person.
That's not what I meant by the alternatives. I meant like they preferred George Washington over General Lee because General Lee would
yeah, I
whip them
grant
and kill
that. I grant that there's like certainly there's like better and worse places to be a slave, but like slavery, like I don't think that there's. I think that the number of slaves who would rather be slaves than be free persons throughout history is like probably close to 0.
Yeah, and so what I'm trying to get at is like I'm looking at these people who genuinely treat their slaves with dignity, and they, they feed them, they clothe them, they don't put them in a rickety house where it's a bunch of holes and it doesn't really protect them. They don't whip them and stuff. And so I look at those slave masters and I'm like, well, that kind of seems more ethical than what we're doing over here.
I might agree with that, although I'd say both are unethical.
See, and that's where I was saying, like, I think it would be ethical once it's to the point where I'm like, I'm willingly giving that to you.
Maybe. I
But
just
they
don't think
were,
that
right?
happens.
They couldn't revoke their
they
consent.
were. No.
Yeah.
And so like for me, slavery is a difficult thing in the Bible. I don't think that it 100% is like, yeah, slavery is a good thing because we see that in the New Testament. It's like you need to treat them with some dignity at least. But the thing that I know about the Bible is when you're looking at the Old Testament, it's supposed to show you that humans are dirty. It's supposed to show you that
That's a very supersessionist view, by the
Well,
way.
do you
And it's
think
also like
that-
wildly anti-Semitic. Just,
do you
just
think,
saying.
looking at all of mankind, do you think that we're not dirty? Do you think that we're just outright good things on this planet?
I think that humans are. I think that humans are generally good, but that's aside the point. If you're saying that the story of the Hebrews, the story of the ancient Jews, is supposed to be a story about how humans are dirty, that's like wildly anti-Semitic, as like a viewpoint,
No, it's
right?
supposed to show you that you're dirty. It's not saying that they're dirty, because
Yes, it's supposed to show you that you're dirty by giving an example of this people group who have widely been considered like less than animals, right?
No, it's
Like
supposed to
it's
show
really bad.
that it's supposed to show all these laws that God has against us. There's over 100 or 630 of them, and we're supposed to uphold those laws perfectly. And none of us can do that. There's not a single human who has ever done that other than what we believe to be Jesus Christ.
Yeah, I would just avoid trying to interpret the Jewish scripture as a way of viewing humanity as dirty. That's like really not a good look.
Well, that's not the 100% clause, because we look at cases like Job, and Job did nothing to sin against God. But Job had all this put against him anyway.
Yeah, that's kind of messed up, isn't it?
Not really. I would be willing.
What?
It's just a different matter of perspective, really.
What?
For me, I have complex PTSD, so like my life has not been an easy one at all. The reason that my PTSD isn't normal and it's complex is because I've basically had never-ending trauma. So from the point that I can remember up to this day, I've never had a moment of peace or where I could feel safe. And honestly, my suffering has brought me a lot closer to God than really how I can describe to other people, because it's a personal thing where I feel saved from where I was suffering.
Well, then we certainly don't want to take that away from you, so we'll move on to the next one.
Oh, did the precept guy leave?
Yeah,
Yeah, he did. Bummer.
that's too bad.
All right, well, we can talk to Mason.
Yep. All right. Hey,
Mason.
make sure you're. Wait. We have supers.
Oh, super chats. We have some very serious super chats. So we have from Tokyo7447 with the $2. What is the equation on the chalkboard behind you? It's just some work from my graduate days. From Garba Gaiman with the 10 Canuck bucks. If a belief without justification is unethical, please justify grapes being better than blueberries. Yeah, Ian. Justify grapes being better than blueberries. You unethical swine.
There, if you don't enjoy getting a hydrating sweet treat, I just can't trust your epistemic faculties, right? Like I feel like you collapse into global skepticism because of how fucking wrong,
How do you know they're hydrating,
how
Ian?
wrong, how incorrect, how false your sense data must be to conclude that blueberries are better than grapes. You're probably just a brain in a vat, right? It just seems more plausible.
Look, you're the one talking about hydration, Mr. Brain in a Vat, but I don't know what to say. Anyway, from Nektu with the $5, thank you both for sharing your knowledge and engaging the opposition. I appreciate the two of you so much. Praying hands. Thank you. And from NASA Official with the $5, times were different back then, Ian, kind of like your female co-host today. Am I right? Amen.
What does that mean?
I think he's saying that I'm trans, but like I don't have any feminine facial features.
Okay.
Like, okay. So I don't know. I don't know what the claim is. Crowfallen with the $5. The Bible is the greatest book of all time. It convinced millions of people to not use critical thinking. That's a fair assessment. Then we have $50 from someone whose name is in, I want to say Mandarin. Could be wrong.
No, you're wrong. It's that's
Is that Japanese?
It's Japanese, yeah.
Okay. They say the Bible is just the written accounts of people from that time. You can criticize their perspectives and whether you think it's accurate, but there's no evidence against it. You stated you had good reason not to believe in God. What is it? Well, look, so for the first part of your statement, absolutely, it is the written accounts of people from that time, and that's the view I take. This criticism that's being levied against the literal interpretation of the Hebrew Bible and of the Christian Bible is that if you take the view that the Bible is supposed to be the infallible word of God, which apparently you don't. If you take that view, well, then there's problems. But if you don't take that view, then there's no problems with the Bible or whatever. There's other reasons to not think that God is real. Anyway, Anything to say on that, Ian, or should we proceed?
We can proceed.
Great. Mason.
Yeah, let's get him. Mason, how's it going?
Yeah. Can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. I just wanted to have. I've only got a very short amount of time.
Wait, I'm so
I-
sorry. Hex asks if I know Japanese. I don't know Japanese, but I did 4 years of Mandarin in high school, so I know what Mandarin characters look like, and I know, like, given like a set of characters, I know whether they're Mandarin or whether they're Japanese. So these ones had a whole bunch of like curvy boys, and that's how you know that they're Japanese. I'm sorry,
Gotcha.
Mason. Please continue.
No, that's all right. Yeah, I only have a few minutes, so I'll just make a few points. You guys can address them, and I won't really do a whole lot of counter. I just wanted to address the slavery topic first of all. When it comes to slavery, we obviously have a Western mentality of what slavery, just because the most recent slavery that we kind of relate to would be 19th century pre-Civil War United States slavery, even in the European area. But that slavery is completely and totally different than the slavery that was going on in Israel, ancient Israel. And they were never treated anywhere near as bad as the slavery that was going on today. And so what I'm bringing up is the idea that slavery was something that was inevitable when it comes to war. So when you have war, you have essentially two options. So it's either war or debt. So when it comes to war, you're either going to kill the people who surrender, or you're going to offer them life, but as enslavement.
Why?
Say it again.
Why? Why wouldn't God, in his perfect mercy, his absolute justice, make it so that there's a third option, either by, I don't know, designing the human body such that there is a third option, designing nature such that there's a third option, or literally just giving them some commandment that draws on his perfect wisdom and perfect insight that allows there to be a third option?
Yeah, well, I mean, that could be a good question, but that's irrelevant to what's actually being taught in the Old Testament. That's what I'm addressing.
So the problem is that if God is morally perfect, we would expect there to be no possible like better moral scenario, better like set of moral commands. That's kind of the critique, is that if we can fathom some like better moral commands that God could have given, then that means that he's not morally perfect.
Yeah, well, I mean, I don't really know if I can fathom a time period where if they let these people go, they'll basically starve to death, or you would just execute enemies of the country, especially during that time, because it wasn't like they can just go off and live on welfare or be taken in by other people's homes. So they basically starve to death because they either have been wiped out, completely removed from their homeland, or whatever. So you
just like take away their like swords or whatever. Like you could like you know make it so that they don't have armies.
Yeah, well, that's a lot easier said than done. They didn't even have hardly any welfare systems, even in their own nation. And so to have to try to worry about other nations outside of going and performing battles or regular diplomatics, they'd have to spend their resources, energy, and time to go and just maintain somebody's country, either keep them small. I feel like that would even be more horrific. To what do you just kill anybody who wants to say that they have an issue against the domineering country. But even if you
certainly God has the power to do that, right?
Yeah, but it's all about humans' free will. And I'm addressing the Old Testament, what's being taught in here. So the slavery that's being mentioned in here, it's all about, it has nothing to do. In fact, it's actually forbidden to go and kidnap somebody, take somebody by force outside of obviously military conquest.
Well, you can buy someone, right?
Yeah, but that wouldn't be taken by force. So in reference to,
well, the person is taken by force.
Absolutely. No, the person.
Like, do you think that they have a say in it?
Military conquest.
Well, look. So if I'm working and living with one person,
yeah,
because I'm a slave to that person, and then they decide to sell me, but I don't want to go. I like working for this guy. What are they going to do? Take me by force?
Okay, well, the force implies. So if you're implying that the force itself is not something that is morally accurate. So in a smaller view, you would say that my debt that I owe, let's say on my mortgage.
Who says that this is a debt slave?
Well, it doesn't matter. You being a slave is an implication of debt. So you owe something.
It's not.
No, it actually is.
No.
Yeah,
it's actually not.
Right. If you're a slave for life, then there's no debt, right? What's the debt for a slave for life?
So a person who, so in the situation of conquest, they
So
either,
you can be born into slavery according to the Hebrew Bible, by the way.
correct.
Like if somebody has a child while they're your slave, their child becomes your slave. Their child doesn't have any debt. Their child hasn't. How could their child have any debt?
Yeah. Okay. Well, okay. I can address these, but I want to go back to what's being taught in the Old Testament, not the argument of whether to get. I can even, let's just say you're right on this is immoral. We can just appeal to that, or we can just say, yeah, I'll give that. You're right. It's immoral, but I'm just really addressing what's being taught in the Old Testament. When it comes to the Old Testament, there is no consideration of slavery. There's no abuse. There's no encouragement of abuse. There's no mistreatment. You can't steal these people out of their homes. They're purchased either from military conquest or from debt. So if you have somebody who owes debt,
or just from other people, and who knows how they got them?
Yeah, other
yeah,
people
yeah.
just, like,
Well, there
sell
was
them.
also ramifications as to who you can do business with. Israel wasn't allowed to do business with.
Well, it says that you may purchase slaves from the people around you.
Correct. Yes, and then that didn't include the people that they were supposed to eradicate, and so
Didn't say
when
it does.
all of them,
Just that
No,
you can just like purchase these people as slaves for life, and you can abuse
Yes.
them. You can beat the heck
no,
out of
you
them.
can't abuse them.
You
No, you
can?
can't
You don't
abuse
think that you can?
No, you can't.
Also, I'll read Exodus 21, 20 through 21,
Go right ahead.
straight from the mouth of God.
Yep.
When
yep.
a slave owner strikes a male or female slave with a rod and the slave dies immediately, the owner shall be punished. But if the slave survives a day or two, there is no punishment, for the slave is the owner's property. So let's do a pop quiz. If you beat the hell out of your slave, but they don't die, you beat them
Yeah.
to an inch of their life, but they don't die. You don't do any permanent physical injury to them. You don't knock out their tooth, knock out their eye.
Yep.
What's the punishment?
Yeah, well, you've got to take care of them. That's the punishment. You've got to spend all your money and your resources to
But
take
No, you
care
could
of
just leave them.
yeah, you can just leave
No,
them.
you can't leave them.
Wait,
That's
what's the
mistreatment.
sure you
punishment if
could.
they die on the third day?
You're in trouble. Why don't you go 2 verses back in verse 18? This whole passage is based on a law regarding quarrels. 2 individuals having a quarrel, and then the question is brought up of, well, what it's a master. What if, the question implies is that if it's a master and their slave. So then it brings up.
Well, no, I mean it's a different paragraph, right? Like this is just a list of commandments.
Yeah,
The quarrel stuff has nothing to do with beating a slave. They're unrelated.
nothing to do with that either.
Sorry?
So the paragraph, it being a different paragraph, is irrelevant.
Well, no. I mean, like the way that this chapter is organized is there's just
Yeah.
a list of unrelated commandments, right?
Yeah, well,
so like the commandment before the quarreling one is anyone who curses their mother or father should be
Yeah,
put to death.
you're looking
Like,
at
That's unrelated.
a modern interpretation of paragraphs, but what was actually written down is the way you're reading it. As you're reading it.
Right, but they're unrelated. They're like it's just a list.
Yeah.
No,
Right.
they're not. No, go to verse 18. If you go to verse 18, they're explicitly referring to when men quarrel and one strikes the other with a stone or with his fist. So it addresses. I mean, they're very related because it
Right. But what about the verse before that? Is that related?
Yeah, whoever
Go
curses
ahead.
father
Verse
and mother
17.
shall be put to death. Is
yeah.
that related?
Well, but listen, hold on. Listen to the context of that verse.
Yes or no?
About it. Well, hold on to address my question. real
Yes or
quick.
no? Is it
if-
related or not?
No, it's not related.
Perfect. Cool. So it's going on the list. Awesome. Excellent.
But listen, verse 18, it refers to if individuals are quarrel, and one dies or does not die, but takes to his bed, that man rises again and walks outward with his staff. He who struck him shall be clear. Only he shall pay for the loss of his time and shall have him thoroughly. Then it asks, well, then the idea is, what if it's a slave and master? Because the same situation occurs in verse 20 and 21.
Wait, a slave and a master? That's not a quarrel.
Yes, yeah, when a man strikes his slave, male or female, because it's the same circumstance shows up at the end. What if they die, or what if they didn't die? Then there's no avenge because the slave is his property.
So-
He has to take care of him.
Yeah, heated disagreements don't happen between master and slave.
1 second, I'm gonna go
because
get
the
something.
slave is the owner's property.
No, that's
The-
see, you're
That is
taking
the
you're taking a
definition
view-
of slavery. You can just Google
incorrect.
that.
You're taking a modern view of what pre-Civil War slavery looked like. Slavery was not in
That's
the
the
sense where
slavery of the
and-
Bible. It's
No,
people
no.
owned as property.
Yes, but there was no room for disagreement. There was no restriction on disagreement. There were quarrels, and so the question then comes up: well, what if they got into a quarrel
That's
and the
just
master
the nature of slavery. Is that you weren't allowed to disagree with your slave owner,
That's
or
a
else they would
presumption.
beat
You're
you.
making a
That
presumption,
is
not
that
actually
is like
evidence.
the nature of slavery, is that somebody forces you to work.
No, that's not. It's not. Slavery is not a monolith throughout history.
That is
Slavery.
a core element to slavery, is that
No,
you are
you see,
forced to work your own as property. You are
this
put
is
to
where
work.
your
That's what a
this is where
slave
your
is. That's what a slave
this is
does.
this is where your misconception comes in, where
It says
you're
that you can
assuming that
beat
this is how the
them.
nature of it was. No,
That's
this
not
is not how it was.
It does. It literally does. It says in 21, in Exodus 20 through 21, as we read, that you
Yeah.
can beat your slave with a rod as
No,
long
it
as they
doesn't
don't
say
die.
can. It doesn't say can. It says if.
Yes, it does.
If. It does not say you can do this.
It says
if.
when. When a
Nick-
slave owner strikes a male or female slave with a rod,
Correct.
and the slave dies immediately, the owner shall be punished. But if the slave
So
survives a day or two, there is no punishment. For
Okay,
the
so-
slave is the owner's property. So what's the punishment?
In verse 18, it says when. Does that mean that men can
What
strike each
is
other?
the punishment?
Well, but in verse 18, it uses
What is the punishment?
the punishment is you have to. No, it's the same punishment in verse 18 or verse 19.
Then that's a contradiction, because it says there's no punishment. So there both
No.
is and isn't a punishment.
Yeah, well, okay. Read the last part of 21. He's not to be
If the
avenged.
slave
because of
survives a
flesh.
day or two, there's no punishment, for the slave is the owner's property.
Correct. And so what does that imply? That implies that the slave owner has to take care of a slave. If you read all the other passages referring to the requirements of
doesn't.
slavery, they could not mistreat their slaves. They
No,
had to
it
take care of
doesn't.
them. Yes, it does. This is all in scripture.
What's
Absolutely.
the punishment if your slave dies after 5 days? What's the punishment?
The punishment would be the same if you go throughout the passages before when it comes to death. I'd have to. It's all the same when it comes to individuals who get into a quarrel, and then the relation between the male and the. And in fact,
So it's not the case that there's no punishment?
No, that's not the case.
Oh, sure. Then you would just disagree with the verse 21 where it says, "But if the slave survives a day or two, there is no punishment." You're saying that's false.
There's no civic punishment, but the idea is he has to take care.
You're
now
adding
he's gotta
words
take
to the
care of
text
it.
now.
Say that again.
You're adding words to the text now.
No, this is all based off the entirety of the laws surrounding slavery within the Old Testament that's mentioned, because you are required to take care of your slave. If you injure your slave beyond repair, you have to let them go. That's the whole context. So when you consider this slave is injured, is mistreated, you have to take care. That's a requirement.
So,
you have to,
Can I,
all of
can I
that's
just jump in
implied.
and maybe I can give an example?
Yeah,
Yeah,
go for it.
Are you allowed to whip your slave?
Oh, I think I lost.
Are you allowed to whip your slave?
No.
Okay. Is there a
Pro-
specific
well,
verse that you're referring to?
Actually, no. You probably would. I'm not entirely for sure that side.
Okay,
of it.
because it's not
punishments.
lethal. It's not lethal
Yeah,
generally.
non-lethal.
At least not after 2 days.
Yeah.
It doesn't take out an eye or a tooth.
Mhm.
So you would just be allowed, right?
Yeah.
With no
yeah,
punishment.
the same way that many men get into quarrels together, like in verse 18 of Exodus 21.
Seems unrelated to the statement that
No,
you're
because
allowed
you
to whip
can't
your
ju-
slave.
You can't just whip your slave just out of hey,
Why not?
move faster.
Does it say else? Does it say that you can't somewhere?
Yeah, you're not allowed to mistreat your slave.
What's the verse that says that?
I can look it up.
Yeah.
I'm
And to
going
be
off-
clear, what does mistreat mean in here?
mistreat, injure, harm,
Or
kill.
does it just mean treat them in the way you're not supposed to treat slaves?
Say it again.
Does it? So mistreat just means treat something in a way it's not supposed to be treated, right?
Yeah, they're supposed to be treated just like any other.
So how are you? So where does it say how you're supposed to treat slaves?
It's all throughout. There's several passages regarding the treatment of slavery and then how slavery applies.
I mean, there are several passages, yeah, but none of them say that you can't whip your slave. None of them say that you can't hurt your slave at all. Like the relevant verses are if you knock out a tooth, if you knock out an eye, or if they die. Those are the relevant verses.
Yeah.
So it doesn't say anything about you can't hurt them in other ways.
Okay. But it does say you can hurt them. Is that right?
Yeah, well, it's saying if you do hurt them, then there's no punishment.
Yeah.
Which, that's how laws work. That's saying that you can.
Yeah.
So the implication is that it's a scuffle between the two of them.
No,
Not
there's no
really.
implication of that.
Yes, 2 verses before that, it's the same scenario, only this time it's a master and slave.
So just to be clear, so one verse before, so Exodus 21:18, sorry, Exodus
Yeah.
21:17 is talking about anyone who curses their father or mother is to be put to death. Does that imply that Exodus 21:18 and 19 is actually talking about a quarrel between a father and a son?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You think
yeah,
that's
so-
what it's saying? So
Yeah, yeah,
Exodus
so-
Exodus 21:18 and 19 only refers to a quarrel between a father and a son, not between any two random people.
No, it's not a quarrel between a father and the son.
But
When
but
men-
the previous verse talks about talks about someone cursing their father.
Correct, and it has nothing to do with the action that's at hand. Then you go into verse 18, it's referring to an action. that's
Yeah.
taken, and then the same action is.
Well, so what you're telling me is that verse 17 and verse 18 and 19 are completely unrelated.
Yeah,
But then you're telling me that verse 18 and 19 and verse 20 and 21 are obviously contextually related.
Correct, because the implication is one strikes one person. If they do not die, then this is the result. Then you go into verse 20, one strikes one person. If they do not die, this is the result. That's the exact same setup. Exact same setup.
Maybe
The
we
same
could
Yeah, except
do... Oh, I'm sorry. No, go for it.
sure, and they
Let's-
talk about pregnant people too.
Yeah, but in these two passages, the exact same setup. Because you can't. They just throw slavery in there randomly. This is public laws that are referring to different things that happen. But when it comes to slavery, like all the implication throughout the Old Testament was that you couldn't just abuse your slaves. This is the
There's
only
nowhere where it says that. You're just reading this into the text.
No,
Yeah.
there's nowhere else in Scripture. There's nowhere else in the Old Testament. Where
Wait,
this
sorry,
encouraged-
wait. So you come over to your slave, you whip them exactly one time. Is that permissible according to the law?
Well, that's irrelevant if we're referring to this passage.
Well, I'm wondering, is that permissible according to the law?
That I'm not for sure.
Oh, wait, could you find me a law that, because I'm citing you a law that says that you can do that, can you cite me a law that says that you can't?
What law says that you can't do
Yeah,
that?
20 through 21.
20 through 21?
Or no, sorry, 21, 20 through 21.
Wait, are you talking about
Yeah,
the
it
same
says
one?
that there's no punishment. So if you come
No,
over
that's
and
not-
whip
no,
your slave
that's-
one single
No,
time,
see, you're applying
then
that.
what's the punishment?
Find me any passage
if
throughout
you beat
the Old
them but you
Testament where
don't
they
make them
encourage abuse of
bedridden,
slaves.
if you beat them
There-
but you don't
there-
make them bedridden, what's the punishment?
Okay, so there is no other passages in the Old Testament that has encouragement of mistreatment of slaves.
Just
This
the
is the
one.
only This is the only passage mentioned,
Yeah.
and you're
Is it
taking it
ethical?
out of. Huh?
Is it ethical?
What's ethical?
Is this passage ethical? The passage, the one passage,
Oh,
is
no,
that
yeah.
ethical?
No, it's referring to when two people get into a scuffle. Absolutely. So
No, it's not.
is
That's
public-
an unrelated commandment,
Yeah.
right?
No.
It simply
in
does not
today's
say that.
standard, if you
It says anyone who beats their male or female slave, not anyone who beats their male or female slave during a scuffle.
there are laws surrounding public, or what is it, domestic violence. That doesn't mean that we encourage domestic violence.
Okay,
It governs
wait,
how
to be
domestic
clear,
Well, it's
to be
'cause it
clear,
says no
domestic violence is illegal
Yes, it's illegal.
in like modern American society anyway.
But the appearance of the law doesn't imply encouragement of it. Just because there's a law addressing
So
a situation that could happen doesn't mean.
so
that
just to be
encourage-
clear, if you have a law, let's take drunk driving for example. The law in America is 0.08, right? That's the threshold. So if the law says you will be liable for drunk driving if you are caught driving a vehicle at a blood alcohol content of higher than 0.08,
Yeah.
does that mean that it's telling you it's totally fine? You're totally allowed to drive at lower than 0.08.
Yeah. It's not.
Okay,
it
so
doesn't-
to be clear, here it says if they do die within a day or two,
Correct.
that's forbidden.
Correct.
But there is no punishment if they don't. Is that telling you that, yeah, it's okay to beat them as long as they don't die within a day or two?
Yeah. Well, I'd have to look more into
Okay.
is obviously there's a lot into that, but the same concept is applied in the passage before when it comes to their death. Because if you go into the passages, either this whole chapter or the chapter before, you'll read about those who end up dying. So there's a passage, I want to say it's in the same chapter. It talks about if you abuse somebody and then if they become bedridden and then they end up dying, that person becomes liable. So that's why.
Yeah. And then it talks about a separate case
Correct.
because this chapter is about this section is about personal injuries, right?
Correct.
So it's
yes.
talking about
Not
the laws
about
regarding what
slavery can
happens.
be allowed. Hold on.
Well, so it's talking about the laws that are around when people get injured, and
Yeah.
if a non-slave person gets injured as a result of a quarrel, Actually, it just says if a person gets injured as a result of a quarrel.
Yeah.
Then, then there are certain rules. And then they say, well, if a slave gets injured, doesn't say anything about a quarrel. Well, here's the rule. So this is just saying, look, there's a whole bunch of different injuries that are happening in this chapter. If a person gets hurt as a result of a quarrel, this is what happens. If a slave gets injured, this is what happens. If a pregnant woman gets injured, this is what happens. If if you knock out somebody's eyes, this is what happens. If a bull, these are not related. These are just all under the same category of personal injury.
Yeah, that's my point I'm making. Yeah, this is not a
So
law.
so Exodus 21 verses 20 and 21 has nothing to do with two people quarreling. Absolutely nothing. It's just a list of commandments that involve personal injury.
Yeah, it's two individuals, and so if it's a slave who did it to his master, obviously the slave's going to have to take care of his master. But if it's a master to the slave, because then the question is, well, what do we do?
Okay, but what if the slave master beats the slave not as a result of a quarrel?
Let me real quick. I'll answer that question, but real quick.
Okay.
If the master, so all the implication is, hey, wait, how does it work with a slave? Because the previous laws had mentioned that the master is supposed to take care of, or the offender is supposed to take care of that person's well-being, and they're forced to do extra to take care of their well-being. And then they say, well, what if it's a slave? Because the slave doesn't own possessions or anything. And they said, well, there's no punishment because they already have to take care of that slave. So if anything, they've screwed themselves.
It doesn't say that though.
No, well, it doesn't. It's implied based on all of the passages referring to slavery, because you have to take care of your slaves. You cannot.
So you only have to take care of the person if the injury was the result of a quarrel. That's what verse 18 and 19 says, right?
If the injury is a result of a quarrel, no, that you have to take care of them. If they are out working and they injure themselves, you have to take care of them.
No. That's not what 18 and 19 say. 18 and 19 says if people quarrel and one person hits another with a stone or with their fist.
Yes, that's
blah
implied.
blah 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 blah. But if to be clear, if a slave master hits a slave with a whip, which is not a stone or their fist, and if it was not a result of a quarrel, then clearly 18 and 19 doesn't apply.
No, because it's a. So let me go back to what I was saying before. Hey guys, I do have to go. Thank you.
Okay, that's fine.
Hey, you guys are great. I love the inquiry. I appreciate the conversation.
Hey, things coming up. We appreciate it.
Hey, we'll see you guys.
Have a good one.
Later.
Doodaloo. I understand that stuff can come up sometimes. We do have some super chats, I think. We have so from Top Dollar, aka Agenda.
Fuck, you'd be a good lawyer. That was a really good out. That was like a really good out to that one.
My wife has told me that before, and she's mad about it. So Top Dollar says, with $5, says, it convinced millions of humans to be civil in many ways. It is because of the Bible. These guys are morally superior now to past humans. Well, yeah, I don't think slavery is good.
Yeah.
People in the past, at least some of them did.
Me personally, I think slavery is bad.
Yeah, it's just a personal opinion, though. Anyway, Matt.
Yeah, let's get Matt. Hey, Matt, how's it going?
Hey, guys, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
All right. I just discovered you guys today. So I joined to say one thing, but the fact that we just talked about slavery for an hour and just trying to justify
defend it, yeah.
it's insane. I'm on your guys' side, so I just wanted to point just to follow up what that guy was saying, on your point of how it's just a list of things. I could kind of see if you're playing devil's advocate, you want to try to bleed 17 into 18. Anyone who curses their father or mother needs to be put to death. If you just look at everything, from 12 going down to 28, it just jumps all over the place. Anyone who strikes a person, and anyone who attacks their mother or father, anyone who kidnaps, anyone who curses, it's clearly just a list.
It's
a list.
Wait, so
this
this
is
is
how
how
they're...
they're... Oh, okay, sure. So this is how they're delineating it, because it jumps sections every time it starts a new section. Every time there's a section that starts with whoever or whenever or when.
Or if someone,
it jumps. There's for all of these, they all start with like a when or an if or all of that. Sure, so that would be a good way.
Very
of
clearly
it's
just
differential. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And I loved your example of the blood alcohol level. I thought that was great. But I actually wanted to join again on your side for the guy a couple callers ago that was talking about.
That is impermissible. That's actually one of the verses here. It's Exodus 21 420. It says, if anyone who so joins the Unapologetic live stream and does not believe in a God that permits slavery, wishes to join, but is not permitted to join, they are to leave. So
I am a
sorry,
sinner.
we gotta follow the rules. Follow the rules.
Yeah. Consider yourself
We have a guest.
evacuated.
We have a guest named Knight.
How's it going, Knight? Knight, are you there? We cannot hear you. If you're trying to speak,
Knight?
we simply do not have the capability. You might need to refresh and then join again.
Knight?
Sorry, I was on a call.
You're good.
You're good.
Oop,
Yeah.
there's an echo
There's
though.
some echo though.
There's some echo though.
Oop, absolutely not. Do you have headphones? I'll unmute you in 30 seconds. Please get headphones. Wow, that echo is egregious. But we would love to talk to you. Call
That
in. Thanks
echo
so much for the
violates
super
Exodus.
chat.
Oh yeah, with the €2 or the £2. Yeah, so that echo violates Exodus 29 verse 69 420.
True.
No echoes. You shall be put to death
Yeah.
or something.
Yeah. Cook.
So, guys, is it better now?
Yeah, let's see. Seems to be. Yeah.
Yep.
Nice.
Yeah. How old are you?
I'm 25.
Yeah. What religion?
I'm a Muslim. But,
Yeah.
Okay.
What's your strongest argument or evidence for the existence of God?
there is not. It's a cumulative case, to be honest.
Sure.
So for me, it was like multiple things. Like over 5-10 years of like experiencing life, and also during my studies as well. Like I studied biology, etc. And it always amazes me like how human simple cells to how the world all intricately designed, etc. Those things question me a lot. So I couldn't get a better explanation for all things. Rationalize everything except a concept.
Yeah, well, let's talk about the biology. So I take our cellular anatomy to be pretty good evidence against the existence of God, just on the basis that there's so many blatant inefficiencies. So the fact that the evolutionary process led to, on our second chromosome, vestigial telomeres that are in the center, these are just a complete waste of energy. They get disassembled and reassembled. They just get sliced out by messenger RNA, and then they get rebuilt back in to the chromosome. Every time your cells replicate, that's not very efficient. But additionally, the fact that there's mitochondrial DNA that's distinct from your other DNA, so you literally have to convert between two languages, that's extremely inefficient. The fact that there's regions that are close to each other don't code for similar things, that's also an extreme inefficiency. There's just so many different inefficiencies, and your cell has evolved to handle some of these inefficiencies. It's literally evolved like repair mechanisms for every time there's mutations, which are inevitable when you attempt to perfectly replicate, billions of nucleotide pairs?
Yep.
So there's tons and tons of mutations that arise. I take all of this as cumulative evidence that our cells are not very well designed. At least, certainly we would expect a perfect design from a perfect designer. We would expect something elegant, but it's not. It's anything but elegant. It's our cells are clunky. They're held together by duct tape.
And on a more macro scale, there's the famous recurrent laryngeal nerve, which I believe all tetrapods have. And interestingly enough, on tetrapods, it starts in the brain. It's a nerve ending. Or I guess it starts at the brainstem. Goes down, wraps around the heart, and then back up to the larynx. Famously, the heart of a giraffe is in its torso. its brain and its larynx are in its head, and the recurrent laryngeal nerve is like 50 feet long because of that. When it could have just taken a shortcut of like 4 inches.
So like there are like multiple points you guys made. So you guys like have some like implicit assumptions that like God like have to make everything perfect, most efficient.
Wait, can you speak up? You're a
Everything.
bit hard to understand or hear.
So can you hear me?
Yeah,
Hello?
it's just a little quiet.
Okay, I'll just because like I have neighbors like on my other room, so if I talk too loudly, it's gonna like mess with them. So, but I'll try my best. So you guys, I think like you guys made some implicit assumptions that God have to make everything perfect. Like I don't see any obligation from God that He have to make everything perfect. To be honest, but it doesn't take away that like the things, biological bodies we see are like working better than like we can make, and if it's better than what we can make, then like are we not like sentient or any like intelligent or anything like that? Like I have
We
to be
are.
consistent on those
Yeah, of
aspects, right?
course. We are.
I mean, all things considered, we're actually really bad at biology, though. Like, we kind of started, like, the whole business of like, properly, like, recreating or, like, redoing biology, like, building, cellular machinery, that didn't exist prior to, like, the 1950s. So it's literally within a lifetime ago that we even started even conceptualizing these ideas. And the ability to, actually visualize these things is far newer with, like, scanning tunneling electron microscopes. So, like, it's just not surprising that even though, yes, we are fairly intelligent, that we're bad at doing this.
Yeah, so like God doesn't have to like it depends like what his intention is. Like if his intention is making perfect, then you guys are right. Like a lot of things are not like perfect like 100%, but I'm a firm believer that
Wait,
like we are
that's kind of a
not perfect
misrepresentation of
because
our
we have room to
point.
adapt.
That's not really the point that I'm making. The point that we're making is that there are these. It's not just that our anatomy is imperfect. It's that it's like gratuitously imperfect. It's like imperfect for no reason at all. It's an imperfection that would have been extraordinarily easy to fix and leads to horrible outcomes. All the mutations lead to things like cancer. They lead to Lesch-Nyhan syndrome, for example, which is a syndrome that causes 2-year-olds to compulsively gouge their own eyes out. Surely a God who is good, who designed our cellular anatomy, would design it in a way where things like that don't happen, especially if he could design it in a way where these inefficiencies simply aren't there.
I mean, like, it's true that we don't know, like, we are not yet capable of engineering a cell from the ground up. That's absolutely true. But, like, ask any mechanical or electrical engineer, and they could tell you how to design the recurrent laryngeal nerve better. Like, even an engineering student could tell you, because it's obvious. You just do a direct connection, right?
Frankly enough, I'm an engineering student. I did
okay.
science.
So tell me, what is the
so
if
so
you
in
have
material science,
if you have a transition line that is 50 feet long and is prone to injury, and doesn't need to be 50 feet long, what should you do?
shorten it.
Shorten it, right? That's exactly what you should do. And any engineer would know this. You would just make a shorter recurrent laryngeal nerve. But on a giraffe, it's 50 feet long for no reason.
Like, on my intention, right? If my intention is like a self-sustaining model, then then I don't have like direct like I can like directly intervene and make it shorter for this special case. And do you understand that? Like
so are you
sometimes like I
suggesting
did programming as well.
But then God didn't influence evolution. So then your claim that well, the cell is so complicated we could have never that's irrelevant for your claim then.
No, it's that I'm saying that like it's like you are like saying that God should like specifically intervene on every specific case, and the one you said, like it happened naturally, right? Like the dominant model about
Yeah, and
giraffe
so
is
did
that
cells.
it's
Yeah.
happened
Cells also evolved
naturally
naturally.
with like
Yep.
naturally self-sustaining processes, etc.
Yep.
That
So did
leads to this.
cells.
Yeah, but cells and everything, including a giraffe, like those things like abide by like certain laws, certain like implicit like constants, etc. Those like results into these, right?
But that doesn't really involve, that's more of like a claim about physics than a claim about biology.
Yeah, biology is a kind of physics if you go down.
Sure, but then we would just need to talk about like the fine tuning of the universe as opposed to if cell biology is evidence for God's existence.
I don't know, like I told you, like the only way I see to rationalize everything, why I expect like a rational like expect rational things behind everything I do is because like a rational being behind everything there is.
But you would acknowledge that there's so many different places in our anatomy where there's no rationale to be found. Maybe there is one, but it's not one that we can see, which means that as far as we're aware, this is not evidence.
Yeah, I was talking about that aspect as well. So I did like material science. So in material science, like when they produce cars, they have like a margin of error. Like not every materials are perfectly perfect. You cannot expect them. So the result, there will be like a 0.00001% of the material that can be defect.
Sure.
So you make like imperfections based on that, and sometimes you see like in like mutations because of the imperfections of the material. Maybe like I'm not sure, I'm not a biologist, but like that can be one aspect as well. So like if God wants to like intervene every like imperfect cases, then there would be no doubt for God then, right? And it depends on the intention of God. Like, does He want to reveal Himself? And as far as I'm seeing, like God doesn't want to reveal Himself directly.
Let's
That's
say that 40% of cars over their lifetime had a brake failure. Would we say that these car engineers are probably pretty shitty at their jobs?
Yeah.
Yeah, so 40% of people get cancer at some point in their lifetime, just by the nature of the way that cells are structured. Would we say that if somebody designed the cells that they probably did a pretty bad job of it?
It depends, like a lifetime. How do you spend like 250,000 miles lifetime for a car? Or you're expecting like 1 million miles lifetime of a car, right? And the human body is like normally for like ages, human average expectancy was 22 years old or 30 years old. Now it's 80. So we are already doing extremes. When and in extreme lifetime cases, they're obviously gonna be unwanted results, right?
Yeah, and it's because our life expectancy is going up because when we exist in nature and when we exist away from like medical technology, our bodies are pretty vulnerable to a wide variety of things. It's only by overcoming the imperfections in our anatomy, by developing workarounds for these imperfections that we're able to do this. The fact that our life expectancy is increasing is just like basically an admission that God didn't make us very well.
I don't know.
Okay, sure. So, in terms of, I feel like that covers like the biology one. You said that the world is intrinsically designed.
Yeah, like I did science, but I'm not a scientist, as I said. But when I normally use science, so like when I was studying every scientific laws or something like that, and also in my programming, some of the programming hobbies, etc. Like there is it feels to me like intentionality behind it. Like every scientific laws, when people try to derive, they expect rational reasons behind it rather than a chaotic random stuff.
Mhm.
They don't they always gather the data expecting the hypothesis that there is a rational reason behind it, right? And that expectation, like I feel like you have to like implicitly assume like every cause has a, let's say every action phenomena has a cause behind it, and all the causes links back together to a unified like physics theory or something like that.
Sure. So
and those things like I can only like make sense if there's a like rationale behind everything else. You guys get me, right?
I do, but I don't think that leads to the conclusion that there's God. So the necessary presupposition to make science work is something called the principle of sufficient reason, that for all of these phenomena, there's like a sufficient reason, there's like an explanation for it. I agree to an extent, I agree with that, that's kind of one of the underlying assumptions of science. But that doesn't necessitate a God, because these things can come back to a different foundation. So, for example, the foundational being could just be something like the laws of physics or the dispositional properties that all the things have, or like the wave function, or any one of like a number of different groundings for these properties. There's no reason why it needs to come back to God, when in fact the existence of laws of physics or dispositional properties or just like a wave function would more than account for all of these.
So are you talking about the wave function, like some theoretical physics stuffs?
Yeah.
Bro, like they are theoretical physics. They don't have like evidence to back them up. That's why they're theoretical physics.
That's not what theoretical physicists do.
Blitz, don't you just like sit in a room and like speculate with zero evidence?
Not zero.
Yeah.
Like, existing evidence. They're like cannot build like a like they don't have the sufficient fund to gather like those kind of data.
Wait, they don't have the what? The sufficient funds?
Funds and like materialistic like limitations. That's what I like thought.
What? So
I
like
could be educated on that if you guys can.
So like Peter Higgs in the 60s and 70s, and then Engelbert, I think that's his name, and all these people who were doing the standard model stuff in the 60s and 70s, they were theoretical physicists. They predicted, based off of prior data, the existence of something that we now call the Higgs boson. And then we built a machine. Starting in the 80s, we started building a machine. And it took a while to finish because building these things are expensive. And then they found it. That's what theoretical physicists do. Like they're the ones who come up with the ideas that we then test.
Like that's small stuff, right?
What?
Like string theory, like that, like those things are like largely. I feel like they're not like.
Okay, well, we're not talking about string theory. We're talking about quantum mechanics.
Yeah, sure. But
quantum mechanics is very well substantiated.
I'm not the quantum mechanist, to be honest. Like, but I still like it's so like. My impression was that it's not like fully like unlike others that are like vastly.
So quantum mechanics, interestingly enough, quantum mechanics is the most accurate theory in the history of science. Like it is the most accurate thing humans have ever come up with.
Could you give me some examples though? Like
yeah, so if you use a particular framework of quantum mechanics called quantum field theory, and in that framework you write down a theory called quantum electrodynamics, which is essentially a theory of electromagnetism and charges. It's like the quantum version of the Maxwell equations. Then you can go and you can predict something called the electron dipole moment. The anomalous electron dipole moment, I should say. And if you go and you get it's 2 plus a little bit, and you can predict like 9 decimals or whatever. Then you go measure it, and it matches to 9 decimals. So like, and no other theory has ever gotten close to that level of accuracy. So to say that quantum mechanics is like not like well founded, it's like we're not so sure if it's right. Like maybe we're not so sure if it's right, but it's the best any human has ever come up with ever.
That's good. That's good. But that doesn't mean like it's like science, like theory, like Newtonians. Then like it got toppled by relativity. Like dominant models can especially in a starting phase, dominant model can be replaced by a better model, right?
Absolutely, sure. But how does that defeat the point that Ian brought up?
Also, he brought up wave functions.
Yeah. So my point is just that we could be looking like I think it's not unreasonable to think that part of the scientific process is looking for like a foundation for all of this, like answering why, like looking for explanations for why things are the way that they are. That's reasonable. I think it's also reasonable, although it's more of a metaphysical assumption, that there's a foundation to all of this. But there's no reason why this foundation needs to be God. It could be one of any number of physical things, like laws of physics, like dispositional properties, like some sort of universal wave function. All of these things would explain it, and they wouldn't require all of the like extra presuppositions that there's something supernatural out there.
But like, if let's say like there is a better theory that doesn't involve like wave function, let's say, and
Yep.
so then like it's called like a square function, let's say. So the square function, like now the square function is the like a foundation of everything.
Yeah, cool. Then we would just look for that. What we're doing
So,
is
like,
like looking for the foundation, and if the foundation turns out to be some specific thing, then cool, awesome. We have no reason to think that the foundation is God, though.
So like for you, like it seems like that, but for me, I feel like there's intelligent solutions and like that can be sensible, and the cause, there's some cause behind everything we see. Then like if it's a wave function or if it's a square function, doesn't matter to me. Like I'm gonna try to find what kind of function it is. I'm not gonna be attached to that wave function to be the underlying foundation behind the universe.
Why should we assume that the foundation is God as opposed to one of these physical things?
Because like it explains other phenomena, like that's
what?
like I told you, like every constant and theories like all have like some connections to each other. We are still trying to find the like ultimate connections, like that explains all the like everything, right? Including the micro.
I mean,
you go for it, Blitz.
Like wave functions explain stuff too. Wave functions don't just say like kind of vaguely gestured explanations. Wave functions like make explicit predictions about the way things are. So it seems like we would have better reason to think that if the wave, like whatever approximates to a wave function in the ultimate reality, supposing it's not a wave function, whatever becomes a wave function when you zoom out enough, that's the thing that better explains it, because that's the thing that can make predictions and can actually make quantitative, or can actually give quantitative explanations and say, yeah, this happened because this was 5 and this was -2 pi and so on and so forth.
So you heard my like the square function, right? It's the same
thing. So supposing that the square function is like what happens when you zoom in on the wave function enough. That's what I'm saying. Whatever ends up being at the bottom, if there is one, and if whatever ends up being at the bottom, if you zoom out enough, you'll end up back at wave functions, and those wave functions have perfect explanatory power, very, very good explanatory power. So whatever's at the bottom that becomes the wave function when you zoom out enough, that's the thing that we would expect to be able to make good explanations, better explanations even than a theistic one.
You can be right if it's like that, but it's just it's working like that. How do I can say it like. But to be honest, like I don't have much understanding of wave function to be like.
Well, that's fine. The wave function is like a stand-in, right? We're saying, the goal of science is to uncover X, where X is just like the ontological foundation. So whatever X happens to be, whether it's a wave function, some other function, some law of physics, like, I don't know, like a bunch of like primitive factors, whatever it happens to be, that's the thing that science is attempting, or at least like some specific sciences are attempting to uncover. So whatever that is, if it's a natural thing, then we can just explain it without referencing God. So there's no reason to assume that God is the one responsible for all of this, because we can explain all of the things, we can explain all the connections in terms of base physical laws.
I have a question though. Like, why do you think like the wave function exists? Let's say the wave function like explains everything, and we have sufficient evidence that it's the right conclusion. What do you guys think that the wave function exists at all? Like, is it like?
So look, like when we do when we do physics, like think about like back in the 1800s when we were talking about like electric fields and magnetic fields and charges and stuff. We have like these formulas. And those formulas let you make predictions about things that you can measure. Now, you can't measure, like at least back in the 1800s, you couldn't measure like individual charges on their own. You couldn't measure like these things kind of directly. But from the mathematical formalism of the theory and the fact that the theory makes really good predictions about the world around us, it's reasonable to infer that the things that the mathematical formalism is describing, those things exist. And it turned out to be true. The mathematical formalism of Maxwell's equations describe charges, it describes currents, electric, magnetic fields. We know that like these things exist now, at least like in any normal conception of exist. And you're led to that conclusion by just examining, well, what is like the object that these equations describe, just by like looking at the mathematics. And so if you follow that same line of reasoning and you go and you look at like, we have like the Schrodinger equation, which like makes really good predictions about what happens when you measure electrons doing whatever. The Schrodinger equation, the thing that the Schrodinger equation is acting on, the object that the Schrodinger equation is describing, is a wave function. So you at least have some justification for thinking that the wave function is a thing that exists.
To be honest, it's a bit out of my league, to be honest.
That's okay. That's fair enough. Well, I appreciate you coming on up here.
Yeah. See you then, Liz. Thanks for the informative.
Yep.
All right, we have some super chats. We have one super chat from Tomi Hassa with the €2. Can you pronounce Hashafan and Gera? Or Gera. I can't pronounce the Hebrew R very well because it's not quite the same as the English R, but yes, I can pronounce them, it turns out. That was the whole super chat.
Proud of you. Good job.
Chines.
How's it going?
How's it going?
We can't hear you. Maybe we can?
No? Okay.
Oh, wait.
We can hear you now.
We can hear you, yeah.
Oh, you can? Okay, cool. So I guess my argumentation would be closer to some idea of objective truth being sort of argued against by an atheist position.
Why?
Well, I think this isn't the core argumentation, but it's just I suppose, like, elucidate why I make this type of argument. Is because if you have evolutionary, I guess, reasons to believe that we developed in order to survive, then our logic would be based in that. If you're a materialist, and as opposed to some like objective notion that exists for certain things which are true always. Does that make sense?
Yeah. If what you're asking for is like some sort of atheistic epistemic justification for the laws of logic, I find that to be pretty easy. So the law of non-contradiction follows just from the not operator. So if you took the not logical operator and you just drew out like a truth table of it, then the law of non-contradiction follows just trivially from that, just like by the meaning of it. So when we say something is not the case, we're making a claim about like mutual exclusivity. We're saying, there's the circle of like the propositions. Let's say like the sky is not red. That's the proposition. So let that be the circle, and then there's like all this like space around it. So we're saying that it's something other than this. There's like a mutual exclusivity. The law of non-contradiction follows trivially from that, because the things that are not that proposition are going to be things that are incompatible with that proposition. So in order to deny the law of non-contradiction, you would need to say that the law of non-contradiction is not true. So you would need to presuppose the not operator in order to say that the law of non-contradiction is not true. But that, of course, would imply the law of non-contradiction because you're assuming the not operator. So you would need to presuppose the law of non-contradiction in order to deny the law of non-contradiction. An epistemic justification for the law of identity. If the law of identity wasn't true, then we wouldn't be able to make sense of the question itself. Like words just wouldn't have meaning otherwise, but words do have meaning. Therefore, the law of identity is true. And then the law of excluded middle follows trivially just from the negation of the law of non-contradiction.
Is that circular in that?
Nope.
It exists. It already exists, so it like justifies itself.
No, it's transcendental. It's saying that
Okay, so it is transcendental.
It's
Okay.
going to be present in like the necessary preconditions for the denial.
Okay, good. Yeah, that is sort of. I mean, just calling it necessary requires that sort of like there is a necessary thing, right? And that most people could argue
And
like
the necessary thing is the not operator.
Yeah.
Okay. So, but that there is something which is necessary, right?
Yeah.
You know. Okay. Sure.
Now, well, so to be clear, that's a question of ontology. You can say that there is like a necessary concept, but then the question is do concepts exist? Do they have like ontological status, or are they merely like kind of like languages, like language games that we use to talk about stuff? That's a separate question. But just to make a connection with your evolutionary point, I mean, like on a materialist worldview, there's an external world, right? And that external world feeds data to organisms. And so it is entirely expected that those organisms who don't adequately understand the external world are going to be less successful than those that do.
Okay, and their success would be the basis of their belief.
Yeah. And so those organisms that more successfully represent the real world with their internal experience are going to be more likely to pass on their genes. And so you end up with us who are wildly successful. And so it's reasonable to infer that, well, that the reason we're wildly successful is because our senses adequately represent the world around us.
Yeah. So I think there's like something interesting to take account of in terms of the way our brains process and reason. We make logical errors quite frequently. That's true. But our brains kind of has two modes, like the automatic mode where it uses like a lot of shortcuts. That's like our very heuristic thinking where we're presented with something where like humans are just riddled with cognitive bias, empirically speaking. These are based in just kind of the way our brains are structured, the way that neuroscience works. Like you could tell present in like the structures of neuroscience that we have these cognitive biases. But we have two modes. We have like the automatic mode that uses a lot of these cognitive biases, and then we have a slower deliberate mode. So you are fully capable of reasoning towards accurate conclusions, and that's evolutionarily advantageous for you to do so. But sometimes it's also advantageous to have like automatic judgments, which might invoke like reasoning flaws or cognitive biases.
Okay, so I guess I just wanted to establish that there is both some necessary and objective truth, and then that we are separate from that.
I suppose, maybe. I don't know. It's like kind of weird I'm not really sure what that means.
So yeah, I mean, you can look up, I suppose, I forget what he goes by now, but when he went by, what is it? Alex something on YouTube when he was debating David or Hawkins, he brought up this argument of evolutionary
Hawkins?
Truth. And
So
yeah,
Alex O'Connor was debating who?
Well, the origins of this argument are Alvin Plantinga. He's the one who originates the evolutionary like faculties argument.
Okay, I was just trying to establish that they're distinct. I suppose that human reasoning and like rationality itself. Is that fair?
I'm not sure. That makes like ontological claims that I don't really have a stance on. So I would say that the laws of logic exist and like they have like the same necessary truth status as like mathematical truths. But whether we're like a Platonist about those and Aristotelian about those, I don't know. I think all positions are compatible with it.
What do you mean by Aristotelian on that?
Aristotelian means that it's present, like the properties are present, they're intrinsic to the thing itself. So for example, when we're talking about ontological grounding, the ontological grounding for a proposition is the truth maker. So whatever a proposition is true in virtue of is the ontological grounding for that proposition. So the fact that P and not P is false, the grounding for that is just the logical not operator, and the ontological grounding for the logical not operator is just the fact that things are distinct from each other. Blue is not red. It's just a distinct color. That itself is sufficient for grounding the not operator. So maybe we would be like Aristotelian about that.
Okay, sure. I mean, I don't know. I guess thinking of ontology, like the things that come to my mind, which I'm not going to necessarily reference, but I'm just going to say it really quickly, is like Leibniz's theory of the monad and like his theologian that he wrote on like the oneness of the world and stuff like that and whatever. Anyway, it's unrelated. I just wanted to bring it up.
Sure.
But I guess the argument that I was trying to make is ultimately that sort of every system of logic is non-total, or rather Turing if it is Turing complete, there's a bunch of other necessary.
Are you talking about first order logics, or are you talking about like propositional logics?
I mean, all of them are subject to...
Because Gödel's incompleteness doesn't apply to propositional logic. It only applies to first order systems.
Because but at the same time, the proof of like the halting problem wouldn't be applied to first order logic, so it would be non-total.
I think that you brought up something that was just, I mean, like, look, like when we think of like the three classical laws of logic, to say that those are non-total or those are incomplete, there's just not a proof of that, right? Like Gödel's incompleteness is specifically about first order formal systems and higher order formal systems as well, that have like notion of quantification, a notion of encoding, and so on. Like the classical laws of logic just don't have that, so it doesn't apply.
Yeah, I'm not quoting Gödel's incompleteness theorem in regards to that. I'm specifying like the halting problem as
the halting problem is, but the halting problem again requires encoding and things like this, which
right.
Again,
it's not a problem for first order logic, but because it can be said to be not Turing complete, it can also be shown that it does not have the ability or the capability of expressing the total set of proofs capable.
Wait, so to be clear, most first order logic systems, or most first order formal systems, first order logic would be an example of that, are Turing complete. Like the one that's used in standard mathematics, ZFC, that's Turing complete.
But that is also impacted by Gödel's incompleteness theorem.
Yeah. But like Turing complete means that you have some mechanism of encoding, so, right?
Yeah, I would give it as an example, I suppose, like lambda calculus. It's most similar to predicate logic and first order logic and things like this. It is distinct from those because it is Turing complete as opposed to those systems. So my argument is being that if you want some system of logic which is capable of expressing all possible truths, and this is related to God because I think in the Bible it says God is truth and spirit. And anyway, now I'm arguing for objective truth being like some human thing or something like that we can attain. But yes, if you have like a lambda calculus, there are certain proofs that are based in like essentially like time or some evaluation procedure which impacts the level of, and I'm not really going through premise by premise, but so I don't know, maybe I guess I'll just get to the conclusion, which is all systems of logic which are capable of expressing all truths are inherently inconsistent and cannot prove their consistency.
Oh, you can actually prove that there are no systems of logic that are capable of containing all truths.
Right. Yes. But
so it's not that there are some; they're just inconsistency, or you can't prove they just don't exist.
Right. And my argument is that if you have a system which is independent of time or some idea of evaluation order, then you avoid those exact issues.
So the theorem that I'm referring to is Tarski's undefinability theorem, which there's a little bit of work to do, but once you invoke the undefinability theorem and once you talk about formal systems, this is just a theorem about formal systems. It doesn't have anything to do with Turing it doesn't have anything to do with like being Turing complete. Doesn't have anything to do with evaluation order. It's just a property of formal systems.
So like, remind me, what form of logic is it using? Is it like written?
It's just like first order logic. So Tarski's undefinability theorem just applies to first order logic, and first order logic doesn't have like any preferred evaluation order or anything like that. Like it doesn't run linearly. It's just a statement about a collection. Like Tarski's undefinability, it assures us that there is no truth predicate. There is no predicate in a first order logic that evaluates the truth claim of any proposition in that first order system. It just doesn't, these don't exist.
So within first order logic, it can't. Yeah, you cannot have a predicate which proves anything in first order logic. That's like similar to like, I suppose, like the argument of like explosion or something like that. Like you prove that you can't prove anything from something in.
Well, more specifically, what this means is that in a first order system, which is generally what we consider to be like kind of standard logic, you can talk about higher order systems, but those are just metalogics. In a first order system, there just is no statement that there is no way of characterizing whether every proposition is true or false. There's no way of formalizing this, and that should be a problem, because that means that just means that there's no way to formalize, like, it in any sort of symbolic way, God's omniscience, right? It's just impossible to do.
I would say that is not exactly as a result of the reasoning you just described, that you can claim God is an omniscient, because we can't prove something in a specific logical system. That's kind of my whole argument, is that there is a system which can prove that.
Okay, what's the system?
Well, it's a Turing complete system.
Okay, what are the axioms of the system?
Okay, sure. Lambda calculus, untyped lambda calculus.
Lambda calculus is lambda calculus a first order logic?
No.
Okay. So what are the axioms of a lambda calculus?
Okay, so you have beta reduction, which is the application of a function. You have, let me think. You have, there's very few, let me think. You have that there are a function which can be beta reduced by some, you have expressions which cannot be beta reduced. So you have these states. I think I'm probably not going to articulate it very well, but I will say that, yes, you have a function which is like a lambda, and it has arguments, and it is applied through beta reduction to substitute expressions that are being applied by the function. So is that somewhat?
Well, I'm a little bit lost, because this seems like this is related to computation rather than like evaluation of truth claims.
Well, yeah. So you can encode using church encodings numbers as expressions as like expressions.
And you're saying that so I don't know anything about lambda calculus, but it sounds like you're saying that lambda calculus evades like incompleteness theorems, evades undefinability theorems.
So there's two types of lambda calculus. There's a typed lambda calculus, which is not what I'm discussing, because that is not Turing complete in the sense, in some other senses. But I'm talking about the untyped lambda calculus, which contains the Y combinator, which is the concept of recursion. So that is untypable because it is subject to the halting problem. You don't know when it'll terminate. So what I'm then saying is that if you remove that restriction of time of halting, then you result in a system which can prove anything and is, if not consistent, you can prove the consistency of other systems.
Well, you can always prove the consistency
through this sort of.
But you can always do that. You just have to go to a meta system, to like a meta logic or something like that. Like if we're talking about ZFC, you could in principle prove the consistency of ZFC in a meta logic, right? In some like meta system. But that's not right. That's not surprising. That's not particularly special.
Sorry. Well, what is special is that what system you prove ZFC in can't be ZFC. It must be another system. And that system itself, what proves that cannot be that system. It has to be another system. You understand what I'm saying? So if you have a Turing complete language, it is capable of expressing its own proof if you ignore the halting problem, which the halting problem is inherent. Sorry, 1 second.
Well, wait a minute. Proofs and the halting problem are not necessarily related, right?
They're not.
No, I mean like look, there are ways to prove things that don't involve running a computation. Now there are very straightforward ways to not run it. There are very straightforward ways to prove things running a computation. Just like you just check that every proposition that you can derive from it is true. even though there's an infinite number, you would have to check the infinite set of them, right? But and so you would never know if that halts or not. If it would halt if you find one that's false, and it would keep going if it never does. So, you could take if you can visualize infinite time and experience infinite time, then yeah, you could see that it never halts. But that's that doesn't seem like it's unique to lambda calculus. Like if you just wrote down every single proposition in ZFC, it would take an infinite amount of time, and you could just verify each of its propositions as either true or false in ZFC.
I guess the point that I'm making is that time is not being defined in that system, right? So you kind of have this weird external definition of time that requires you to this is I guess inherent to, if you have such theories without a definition of evaluation order, then you run into Russell's paradox, where you have too large of a set where the proof you have is contained within the set. Does that sort of make sense? You don't have that in
you'd have to give me a little bit more details, but it seems at least
sure.
I think I know what you're saying.
Okay. All right. Yeah. Anyway,
so is the claim that God is a lambda calculus that doesn't have time?
Something not exactly similar to that, but more so similar to the system which is capable of proving the consistency of itself and other systems.
So God is a set of axioms?
Sure, yeah.
So God doesn't have a mind?
Yeah, does God have a mind?
Does he have a mind? I guess we'd have to talk about what a mind is. That's why I was talking about sort of the evolution and truth, whether or not we have a mind under that definition.
Yeah, of course we do. So a mind is just a
Okay,
thing that experiences. Experiences as qualitative experience, maybe.
I guess how do we know that a rock doesn't have experiences?
It would probably just be
that's why I was bringing up Leibniz's theory of the monad and stuff like that.
So we would definitely just have to give in that instance, what we would be supposing is that something like panpsychism is true. So we could give the defeaters to panpsychism. Oh, it's just the statement that there's consciousness kind of in everything. The way that we arrive at the conclusion that rocks aren't sentient is probably going to be an inductive case, a Bayesian case, that consciousness is intimately tied to the brain, and rocks don't have one of those.
Okay. Is that most of it?
But even if we do grant that rocks have consciousness too, rocks have minds, that would still not get you to axioms having a mind, because axioms are fully described by their words, right? By the words that make them up. And so an axiom is an abstract thing, whereas the panpsychist view would say that all physical things have minds or something like that. So you still don't even get to, maybe rocks do have minds, but I still think 2 + 2 = 4 doesn't. I don't know how you would get to 2 + 2 = 4 has a mind. I don't even know what that would mean.
Well, I would say that being capable of producing more order than what is more order than the sum of its parts, sort of, right?
But axioms don't produce anything. Axioms are a statement of propositions that you accept as true. Agents, minds, are the things that take axioms and produce things from them.
I would say that there are consequences of axioms, and I would describe those as being some order or something like that. As a result of, you remove the axiom, there's disorder. You add the axiom, and it creates some sense of order. Is that fair?
Well, it just seems like we're conflating words like create and
these aren't formal
all these kinds of things. It's absolutely true that if you have one set of axioms, you'll have one set of true propositions that follow from it, and if you have a different set of axioms, you'll have a different set of true propositions that follow from it. But I wouldn't I think that the statement of I think that inferring that if the axioms were different, the true propositions would be different, that means that the thing has a mind.
Sure.
It just seems far-fetched.
I'd agree if it were just that, I could see your point and I would grant it, but it is based in the sort of evolutionary argument of objective truth and where we fit in that. So that's why that sort of clause is very important to understand where we fit in some logical system, where minds fit in logical systems, whether or not we are totally distinct or rely on them in some way. Like, I wouldn't say most people believe that evolution is completely like distinct and unrelated to logic or the rules of logic. And I would claim that because there is some sort of connection there, that we can sort of personify our relation to that logic in a certain way. Because I don't believe that necessarily like God is, you know, completely like we can understand him fully because we are not this sort of omniscient being. I don't think, but I think we can understand it in sort of the way that we understand logic, or that logic was influencing evolution. In that sense, we kind of can. And sort of, yeah.
It seems like the metaphysics here are some kind of like kind of require that logic exists. It has like an ontological status that exists in the same way that like an object is something that exists. But
absolutely.
So does your metaphysics have a response to like nominalism?
I'm not familiar with nominalism.
So nominalism, broadly speaking, nominalism comes from nomen or something like that. It's some Latin word meaning name. So nominalism is essentially that like these things like logic and numbers and, you know, abstract objects, these are kind of like essentially language games that we play, in that they exist solely in the mind as like, you know, concepts there. And if there were no minds, these things wouldn't exist.
Okay, sure. That is definitely a difficult question to ask. I do believe that in a sense that there always has been some logic or logos, if that's an answer to your question. But
well, when you say logic, I think of one thing. When you think of logos, I think of Jesus. So
okay, I should say then, I'll specify, I'm not like very deep on epistemology or ontology. I, you know, kind of just make certain premises other people have argued before me, and I would go to like, I suppose like Leibniz's ontology and his understanding of like, I think it's Theogos, his book he wrote on like the oneness of the world and stuff like that. But I don't know that I can quote his arguments right now. But yeah, I would just refer to that in terms of an ontology or something like that. I don't know if that answered your question at all. I wasn't really sure what nominalism was referencing. And
Ian,
like,
as the resident philosophy understander who knows what nominalism is and also who's probably read Leibniz, does that respond to the nominalism claim? Or to the nominalism
well, it just kind of
position?
seems like two ships like passing in parallel, right? You're saying like we could be nominalists about these things, and then this guy is saying I'm not a nominalist about these things. But the point is that the way nominalism is being used, it's being used as what's called in philosophy an undercutting defeater. So in order to establish deductively an argument, you need to rule out the possibility of any of the other positions being true. So you would need to somehow establish that Blitz's nominalism is false in order to conclude that therefore there was like a mind that always existed, or there was like these like laws of logic that always existed, where Blitz is going to think that these laws of logic are things that are compiled by humans.
But they're still subject to like evolution if it's like sort of like a materialist, humanist explanation, which I guess it's hard to argue with you because you don't necessarily believe that. But yeah. So anyway, I don't know exactly what type of debate is actually like going to make any sense from like people arguing other people's positions, which I mean, obviously anybody can, but I don't know.
I mean, so for what it's worth, I am a nominalist insofar, like I haven't come up with something that I'm not a nominalist about. Maybe someone will come up with something someday, but like, you know, I've just like, logic, it's like a language game that we use to make sense of the world, and this language game happens to be like particularly good for communicating ideas.
Okay. So then logic in its like objective sense does exist independent of humans or not?
No. I mean, I would suspect that like other minds, like aliens or whatever, would come upon something similar to ours, just because it's really, really, really basic, and so there's like not a lot of different things that you could have come up with. But like, I wouldn't say that it has like any objective ontological existence.
Yeah. Okay. I guess I just wanted to elucidate different people's opinions on this. I don't have necessarily like a follow up to like sort of like, oh, and thus that concludes, that you believe X,
No,
but
that's totally
I would,
fine.
yeah. I guess, I don't know. Let me think of one last like thing that I feel based on that. Well, I guess it would just be a further question to you, Dr. Blitz. It would be, how do you feel? What is your opinion then of consciousness and like the consciousness of a rock? You said you were sort of like agnostic on the consciousness.
I
of
don't
a
think
rock?
that rocks are conscious. I take the same Bayesian approach that Ian does.
Mhm.
But if they were, it wouldn't really change my worldview all that much.
Okay.
It would definitely expand like philosophy of mind stuff outwards, but I don't know. I don't think Blitz has like a particularly strong philosophy of mind position. I don't really have
I
a
also don't care about it a
particularly
lot.
Yeah, I mean me neither.
Yeah.
I don't know.
I don't particularly. I actually
it's one of my
do.
least favorite fields because I think that it's probably it gets weird. There's like certain philosophical fields that just get weird where it's like I feel like this is probably something that we should just let neuroscientists do. I don't really know why we're doing like philosophical speculation as opposed to
Makes sense.
letting like
And-
neuroscience run its course.
And I guess I would appeal to that sort of intuition that rocks don't have consciousness for some reason as to why we are special, is we have some sort of connection to logical laws or something like that. And that is like a state at which you attain at a certain point of development. You attain this ability to access logic. And that is sort of not an inventing. How do we attain logic?
Yeah, I feel
when
like
does
that
it
requires
happen?
like a belief in like
Okay.
some sort of like Platonic antenna where at
Yeah.
some point in our conscious development we can like just like interface with this different realm somehow.
Yeah.
But that
Sure.
seems like very implausible, right? Because that means that we're standing in like causal relationship with something that's like in a completely different dimension constantly.
Yeah.
And that just
Okay.
feels really weird.
So yeah, it's a dualist position. It's not a materialist position in that
Mhm.
sense. I would say that it is difficult to then find, let me think of an objective, well, okay, do you just lose objective truth and get sort of a pragmatic truth
No?
as a result? Does that matter?
I don't think so. I don't think, because Blitz and I have like slightly different positions. I think the trajectory that my stances are at, I'm heading towards like Aristotelianism, where I think that these things are kind of just like intrinsic to objects themselves, that like the universals are just embodied by the objects and that's how they exist. So the fact that things are distinct from each other just gives rise automatically to the laws of logic as being objectively true.
So then
The words are obviously human creations, but the truth maker, the actual thing, the reason why the laws of logic are true, that's something that exists regardless of humans.
okay, and I don't want to interrupt Blitz if he had to clarify
No,
this.
you're fine. Oh, actually, I did have a question. The whole notion of like we're special because we have this connection with logic, like it's a great explanation if you believe that humans were created like out of like from nothing, but it kind of like falls apart once you look into like evolutionary biology, because then you have to like kind of put a dividing line where prior to this these indistinguishable apes had no connection to logic, and then after this, like this generation, these indistinguishable apes had a connection. Like it seems very, very arbitrary, and presumably access to the logical realm or the Platonic realm or whatever, that's a binary. I wouldn't imagine that it could be a gradient.
Okay, sure. Yeah, I'll address that. I guess I just wanted to talk about or mention one thing about Aristotelianism, I suppose, and I'm not sure in that sense. Like the first thing that comes to my head is like Socrates, and he would probably try to bring up contradictions. And where do contradictions fall in Aristotelianism? Are they sort of like able to exist because things are inherent in themselves, and so it doesn't blow up the universe if you have a contradiction? It just blows up like this one like particle in some quantum field or something like that. I don't really, I don't know if that might not make any sense, but I'll address Dr. Blitz if it doesn't.
Sure. So what I would say, contradictions are grounded in difference. Difference itself is the thing that grounds the not operator. But contradiction is a relation between propositions. I'm kind of inclined to believe that propositions themselves, like the words themselves, are human. That contradictions exist in the sense that you can believe contradictory things, right? Like you can believe like, I don't know, you can believe like God's all good, and you can believe sometimes God does bad things. You can believe that. It's just like cognitive dissonance, right? It's contradictory. So you can like certainly believe contradictions, but that doesn't like they aren't in reality, because reality is built on distinctions, and contradictions mean that there are no distinctions.
So I guess when you're saying like it's something that is particular to itself, what is itself? Like what is that?
What in terms of what? Which thing?
In terms of Aristotelianism, in terms of like this idea is intrinsic to its self.
So,
I think that's how you said it.
Yeah, so Aristotelianism basically holds that things have properties, that universals exist. So that's how it differs from nominalism, because Aristotelianism says universals exist. They are intrinsic properties in things themselves. So for example, they could be like a dispositional property for things to follow along like gravitational paths at specific rates or whatever, that there's just like these intrinsic dispositions, like the laws of physics exist in the sense that they're embodied.
Mm-hmm. So then I guess why can't a contradiction be embodied?
Because things are distinct from each other, and in order for the contradiction to be embodied, things would need to not be distinct from each other, but they are. Things are distinct. But if they were distinct, then it wouldn't be a contradiction. And if they are distinct,
sure.
then,
I agree.
then they can't be, if they're distinct, they can't be the same kind of by definition.
Right. I guess I would just wonder, what measure are you using to tell that things are distinct? And is that like, is that like ontologically relevant? I don't know.
So the measure to tell these things, that's kind of an epistemic question. So I would just appeal to, any epistemology could tell you that things are distinct. There's like transcendental arguments for this, that if things weren't distinct, then the question itself wouldn't make sense. If all the words had identical meaning to all the other words, then you just wouldn't have said anything, right? Like I wouldn't be able to process the question if all the words were identical to each other. But I was able to process the question, therefore the words are distinct.
Right. That seems, I mean I may be wrong, but that seems a little circular in that like words exist such that they wouldn't if they weren't distinct.
It's not circular, it's transcendental. So a transcendental argument argues from necessary preconditions. So there's like certain facts about our experience that require like specific necessary preconditions. So one fact about our experience is that I understand the words that you're saying, you understand the words that I'm saying.
Mm-hmm.
Now, regardless of what grounds this, there needs to be difference. There can't not be difference. But questions of grounding are ontological in nature, whereas questions of how we know, well, that's epistemic.
Okay. So, and I guess like then that would be my transcendental claim, would be that sort of like logic and God exist. Right? Is that
why? I would
equally
just
valid?
ask you. So you need to. The problem with this is that you would say if X exists, then God exists. Like God is the necessary precondition for something. Like maybe God is the necessary precondition for logic. Logic exists, therefore God exists, or whatever transcendental argument you want to make. And I would just ask you for justification, because that premise, the first premise for every transcendental argument for God I've ever heard, is just like the least plausible thing I've ever heard in my entire life.
Right. So words, I suppose. What was the thing which necessitated them?
Words or meaning? Because these things are distinct. Like words are the mechanism for meaning.
Meaning. I mean meaning then.
Sure. Meaning comes from the mind. Like just in like our mind is able to represent things about the world. It's able to see things. It's able to like think up things, imagine
Sure.
things. It's able to
I
I can close my eyes and like represent an image of you just based on the facts that I'm like I've seen your picture. I'm able to conjure this up. So there's like
Okay.
a specific like intention. There's like an aboutness to thoughts. Thoughts
I
are
guess I should
about
say
things.
the meaning of distinction. I should say what necessitates the meaning of distinction.
The distinction of meaning or the meaning of distinction?
The meaning of distinction.
So the meaning of a word?
No, just that we can meaningfully distinguish things. What necessitates that?
Oh, sure. That's going to come down to just evolving like epistemology, right? The fact that you're capable of having thoughts that are distinct from each other, the fact that to have a thought is to be able to think about something. There's aboutness to thoughts, like you think about things. So being able to think about more than just one thing gives you aboutness, and this is present even in like extremely simple organisms.
Okay.
You know, there's like there's like the food drive. Like you think about food.
Right.
You're thinking about like how tasty this like smaller fish would taste in your mouth. And then you're thinking about how much you don't want to get eaten by this bigger fish.
Right.
Like you have two distinct thoughts. They're very simplistic.
I get
and
that.
You don't like reflect on them, but you have distinct thoughts.
Right.
They're about two different things.
I suppose that. Sorry. I suppose the thing that I see is that that's like a materialist explanation. I was more so wondering, like, how do you make distinctions in the Platonic or the sort of abstract domain? Are they just purely
like epistemology, right? Like
evolutionary?
Yeah. Like
Okay,
it's
gotcha.
gonna be
That's what I was
grounded in
wondering.
our mind, and our mind
Okay.
came from evolution. Yeah.
Okay, sure. I was just wondering. Anyway, now I think I'll try to address Dr. Bulitz's thing of why, I suppose, how do you contort this arbitrary point at which, reasoning was attained in evolution. And I guess I would appeal to something I don't really entirely understand, but maybe you can, inform me, Ian, about sort of the way in which B theory and time works, such that times exist at multiple, all at the same point,
They're all actual.
or rather, they're all actual.
They all equally exist.
Yeah.
Yes. So I suppose in that sense, so long as something attained this level of reasoning at any point, then it sort of exists at all points as having been something which in the future will attain reason.
So the question is more about like, so the way to think about B theory is just think of like a loaf of bread, right? Each slice of bread is a different moment of time, and the whole loaf exists. The question is why is it that like it's this slice of bread where the connection between logic and organism happened and not that slice of bread? That's the arbitrary question.
Okay,
that's the question that
it's just the ordering, like, is.
It's not the ordering. It's like the slice, the moment of time where it happened is arbitrary. The slice, which particular slice, is arbitrary.
So it's a discrete interval problem.
So like we can just think biologically, like why is it that one organism had it and its parents didn't?
Okay,
what is
sure.
What is the cause of that?
Right. Okay. Sure. I would say that because that species, which was it changed at this moment we were talking about into another species.
But that's the point that I was getting at. Like when we think of like evolutionary biology, there is no way to distinguish species. There's no way, like you can distinguish species over time, but speciation is a grayscale, right? So it doesn't go from black to white. It goes from black to very like infinitesimally less black to infinitesimally less black, and then eventually you get over to white, and then you realize, oh, black and white are different things.
Sure.
But comparing like an offspring to its parents, you will never be able to tell that they're in different species.
Okay, makes sense. So I guess, where do you get the? Because I guess I'm not arguing for a gradation in terms of reasoning. I'm arguing for sort of a point of enlightenment or something like that.
Right. That's what I'm asking about. Like,
yeah.
What was the feature of the you know, the offspring that the parents didn't have that let this happen.
Well, I suppose this isn't, I guess, my argument, but my first thing that I think of is like a materialist explanation would describe such a event as occurring in the sense that they would attain logic in some form at some point. Like, I
don't think that's true. I think that like a materialist would say, yeah, like ordered thinking is something that's not a binary and is rather a gradient.
Okay, sure. I guess I don't know that I could describe it as a binary, I guess. But
like on or off?
Yeah, I guess that's
that way. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I think I would just describe it sort of, in like what seems to me would be like Leibniz's theory of the monad, which seems closer to an Aristotelian view, I guess. But yeah, and so that in that case, it just seems that so long as you have sort of logic existing independent of humans, that necessitates some necessary condition by which we can somehow attain it, and then that would then somehow be a way in which we exist in like the same spirit as God or something like that, or this logical system which was necessary. And that would just be my position, I guess.
Yeah, I just don't really know what the motivation to believe it would be, right? Like, I don't know why.
Sure.
Like, yeah. So I get you saying like I believe this. The problem is that unless there's like some sort of defeater presented for Blitz's view or my view, we just don't really have like a reason to give up the view.
And remind me what was yours and Blitz's?
Well, so Blitz is a nominalist. He thinks that they're created by humans. I'm I don't know. I'm kind of agnostic to it, but maybe I'll be like an Aristotelian, and I'll say that logic is just present among like the world itself. That it's like intrinsic, based on difference.
Okay. Okay.
So you would need to present like some sort of defeater in order to say, in order to be able to. In order for us to conclude, therefore God exists, you need to present like some sort of defeater to the view.
Right. I guess my question would be, what are the ways in which you falsify those two views, Aristotelianism and nominal?
You would just need to come up with like something that can't be accounted for, like some sort of contradiction in the view, like, I don't know, something of that sort.
Okay.
So generally, like things, at least the things that I care about that make me change my view is consider like explanatory power of a view. If one view can explain more things than another view, then that's like a good reason to adopt the better explaining view, right?
I would agree. Yeah, I would agree.
Simplicity is another. This is assuming you can't derive a contradiction, which I think that people generally will struggle to derive a contradiction for these kind of like foundational philosophical views. But like, simplicity, like if one view requires all this really convoluted stuff and then another view is just like really straightforward and simple and only has XYZ things, then that's perhaps another reason to adopt a view.
Sure. Okay. I guess my question would be for something like nominalism or Aristotelianism. I think I brought this up before and I'm still not certain of it exactly, but like, why are these sort of like worldviews consistent? Like, why can you not have a contradiction in them?
Well, so in my view, the reason why there aren't going to be contradictions is just going to be because there's intrinsic, there's like specific intrinsic properties to the views, and these, or there's intrinsic properties to things, and it makes the things distinct from one another. That things have different properties, and for that reason, this thing that has different properties than that thing, this thing is not that thing. So if this thing is not that thing, then the law of non-contradiction follows, which means that there's going to be no contradictions because things are distinct.
Right. I agree. I'm kind of not understanding how that's related to specifically nominalism and Aristotelianism.
No, that's for Aristotelianism.
Yeah, it's for Aristotelianism.
Not for nominalism.
Okay, got you. So for Aristotelianism, making the distinction is why you avoid contradictions. And I suppose then what I'm misunderstanding is what a contradiction would even look like in Aristotelianism.
there would be like a P and not P. So what that would mean, in order for there to be a contradiction, a thing would both need to have a property and not have a property.
Okay. So I guess you'd have to find like a physical object which has both not a property and a property.
Yeah.
In the same sense.
So, yeah. Like for the same property.
Okay, so then I guess it just comes down to like what is a property?
Just like that's a good question. I'm not sure if I have like a precise definition, but maybe we could say that it could be a universal or just like something that you can predicate off of. You can say this thing is this,
Sure.
where this is a property, or you can say this thing embodies this universal, where it has like some sort of universal.
Sure. I guess I would be wondering then what makes it universal in the sense of if it's
The fact
just
that
particular
it's the same property
object.
among different things.
It's a definition of what a property is. So I guess like why do objects, like why are they acting as properties? Like what keeps them all from knowing, oh, this is what a property is, I'm going to behave like a property?
So it's not a question of no, it's a question of dispositions. So things are disposed to behave in specific ways. The water is disposed to boiling at this specific temperature.
So that's a given. Gotcha.
Yeah, it's like intrinsic to the thing.
Okay. All right. Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, thanks for, I guess, like informing me on.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, great questions, by the way.
I appreciate it. All right. Have a good one.
All right, Chineth, thanks for being here. We appreciate it. All right, so should we end it there?
Yeah.
I'm hungry. I want to eat lunch. Okay, well, there are no other super chats to read. And it's perfect timing to end it. You're probably going to do a live, huh?
Yeah, I think so. Probably. Likely.
Okay, so
fuck, I have gosh, while you were talking to the guest, I read like the first 2.5 pages of this paper. I think it's really promising.
Okay, well, so make sure to go watch Ian after this live stream ends. And if you're not following, if you're not subscribed yet, whether on TikTok or on YouTube, you should be both. Just because big number go up make feel good.
True.
Anything else to say before we close out? Okay, I guess that's it. Same time next week, roughly, yeah?
Yep. All right, later.
All right. Later, everybody.
Yep, I'll be live soon.